The crack echoed across the training ground like a gunshot. 800 naval personnel stood frozen, watching Sergeant Blake Cortland collapse, his leg bent at an angle that made even hardened SEALs wince. The woman standing over him, 55 years old, barely 5'3" in her royal blue V-neck training shirt, hadn't even broken a sweat. 3 seconds earlier, he'd called her grandma and lunged for her throat. Now he was screaming for a medic. But before we dive into how a retired Navy SEAL instructor broke a decorated sergeant's leg in front of Pentagon brass, hit that subscribe button and follow this story to the very end. Comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Catherine Brennan had forgotten how loud 800 sailors could be when they smelled blood in the water. The roar from the assembled personnel at Naval Special Warfare Command's demonstration grounds hit her like a physical force, but she kept her expression neutral, her pale blonde ponytail barely moving as she turned to face the referee. "Ma'am, you're certain about this?" Master Chief Daniel Morrison asked quietly. His weathered face creased with concern. At 68, Doc Morrison had served with Kate during operations that didn't officially exist. He knew exactly what she was capable of. He also knew what was at stake. "I'm certain, Master Chief. Blake Cortland doesn't pull punches, especially not for women." Kate finished, her voice calm. "I noticed." Across the sparring ring, Sergeant Blake Cortland was playing to his audience. At 32, he was everything the modern Navy SEAL recruiting poster promised: 6'2", 220 pounds of muscle, with the kind of chiseled jaw that made civilians think of action movies. His unit worshipped him. His commanding officer had selected him personally for this demonstration, and right now, he was making sure everyone knew exactly what he thought about his opponent. "They're really scraping the barrel now, boys," Blake announced, his voice carrying easily across the training ground. "What's next? Bringing in someone's grandmother to teach us hand-to-hand?" The laughter was immediate and brutal. Kate watched several female sailors in the crowd shift uncomfortably, their eyes dropping to the ground. She'd seen that look before. Shame by association, the kind of internalized defeat that made women question whether they belonged in uniform at all. "Sergeant Cortland," the referee warned, but his tone lacked conviction. Blake heard it too. "No disrespect intended, ma'am." Blake continued, his grin widening as he turned to face Kate directly. "I'm sure you were very impressive back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But maybe you should let the actual operators handle this demonstration." Kate stepped into the ring, her movements economical and precise. She'd learned decades ago that responding to verbal provocations was a waste of energy. Besides, she'd heard worse, much worse, usually right before someone got carried off the field. "The match will proceed under standard combat demonstration protocols," the referee announced, his voice struggling to compete with the crowd noise. "No strikes to the groin, throat, or eyes. Submission or incapacitation ends the match. Understood?" "Understood," Kate said simply. Blake didn't bother answering. He was too busy accepting fist bumps from his teammates, his confidence radiating like heat from asphalt. In the VIP observation area, Admiral Margaret Chen leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes fixed on the ring. At 53, she was one of only 12 female admirals in the United States Navy, and the first woman ever to command naval special warfare operations. She hadn't flown from Washington, D.C. to San Diego to watch a standard training demonstration. "That's really her?" Captain James Walsh asked, his voice low. "The Kate Brennan. Lieutenant Commander Catherine Brennan, retired," Admiral Chen confirmed. 20 years in SEAL team operations. 3 Navy Crosses, 2 Silver Stars, and a classified service record that would make your eyes water. She was operational when most people thought women couldn't even serve on combat vessels. Was she part of... If you have to ask Captain, you're not cleared to know. Admiral Chen's tone wasn't unkind, merely factual. Let's just say that several terrorist organizations in East Africa spent a lot of resources trying to figure out who the Pale Ghost was. They never did. Walsh studied Kate more carefully. She looked like someone's aunt, the kind of woman you'd see at a grocery store or church social. Her royal blue training shirt was faded from countless washings, her gray sneakers scuffed and practical. Nothing about her screamed, "Elite Special Operations." That Admiral Chen knew was precisely what made Kate Brennan so dangerous. The referee stepped back. "Begin." Blake charged immediately, his strategy as subtle as a freight train. He came in high arms, spread for a grappling hold that would let him use his 100-pound weight advantage to crush his opponent into submission. It was the same move he'd used to dominate every other opponent in the qualifying rounds. Kate wasn't there when he arrived. She'd slipped left, her movement so economical it barely registered. Blake's momentum carried him forward 2 steps before he could stop and reset. "A runner," he announced to the crowd, grinning. "Classic." The laughter was more scattered this time. Some of the more experienced personnel in the audience had noticed how cleanly Kate had evaded. That wasn't panic. That was training. Blake came again, faster this time, trying to corner Kate against the edge of the ring. She circled right, maintaining distance, her eyes never leaving his center mass. She wasn't watching his hands or feet, a mistake amateur fighters made. She was watching his hips, his shoulders, the subtle weight shifts that telegraphed his intentions a full second before his body committed. "Come on, Grandma," Blake taunted, his breathing still easy. "You can't run forever." "I'm not running," Kate said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken since the match began. Something in her tone made Blake pause for half a second. Then his pride reasserted itself. His commanding officer was watching. Admiral Chen was watching. This was supposed to be his showcase, his ticket to the classified special operations unit he'd been lobbying for. He couldn't let some retired relic make him look foolish. He feinted left, then exploded right, his hand shooting out for Kate's throat in a controlled strike that would, if it landed, put her on her back, gasping for air. Kate's counter was so fast that most of the audience missed it. She rotated inside his reach, her shoulder driving into his extended elbow, disrupting his balance for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Her foot hooked behind his knee, and suddenly Blake was stumbling his weight forward. His center of gravity compromised. He caught himself before going down, but the crowd's energy had shifted. That hadn't been luck. That had been technique. "Not bad." Blake admitted, his smile tighter now. "You've got some moves for an old lady." Master Chief Morrison, watching from ringside, allowed himself a small smile. Blake Cortland had just made a critical tactical error. He'd acknowledged Kate as a threat. That meant his ego was engaged. And when ego took over, discipline went out the window. Blake came in more aggressively now, throwing combination strikes, jab cross low kick, designed to overwhelm with speed and power. Kate gave ground, deflecting rather than blocking, letting his energy dissipate against angles instead of absorbing it directly. Each retreat was measured, controlled, drawing him deeper into his attack pattern. "She's studying him," Admiral Chen murmured, more to herself than Walsh. "Ma'am, watch her footwork. She's making him commit to his patterns, cataloging his preferred combinations. Every attack he throws is data." Walsh looked more carefully. Admiral Chen was right. Kate wasn't fighting. Not yet. She was conducting reconnaissance. The match had been going for 3 minutes when Blake made his first real mistake. He threw a high roundhouse kick, a flashy move designed to impress the crowd. Kate ducked under it easily, but instead of countering, she simply reset to her defensive stance. Blake's breathing was heavier now. Not from exhaustion, he was in superb condition, but from frustration. Nothing was landing. This was supposed to be a quick demonstration of male superiority, a casual reminder of natural physical hierarchies. Instead, he was chasing shadows. "You know what your problem is," Blake said, circling now. "You think technique beats strength, but in real combat against a real enemy, all your cute little moves don't mean shit." "Is that what you learned in combat?" Kate asked, her tone genuinely curious. The question hit Blake like a slap. His combat experience consisted of 3 deployments to Kuwait and Bahrain, both relatively safe postings with occasional patrol duty. He'd never fired his weapon in anger, never faced an enemy who was actually trying to kill him. But the crowd didn't know that, and his commanding officer had been careful to phrase his service record to sound more impressive than it was. "I've served my country," Blake said, his voice hardening. "I'm sure you have." Kate's expression didn't change. but something in her eyes said she knew exactly how much combat Blake had seen. That wasn't an insult, Sergeant, just a question. Blake's jaw clenched. This woman was making him look bad in front of everyone who mattered. Every second this match continued was another second his carefully constructed reputation took damage. He came in fast and vicious, abandoning all pretense of a training demonstration. His strikes were aimed to injure now, an elbow toward Kate's temple, a knee toward her ribs, combinations designed to do real damage. Kate's defense shifted. She was no longer just evading. Now she was redirecting, using Blake's momentum against him, sending him stumbling past her with minimal contact. To the untrained eye, it looked like he was clumsily missing. To those who knew better, it was a masterclass in economy of motion. Sergeant Cortland, the referee called out, his voice sharp. Remember the rules. Blake ignored him. His world had narrowed to the small woman in front of him, the one who was somehow making him look incompetent. His breathing was ragged now, not from physical exhaustion, but from pure rage. In the VIP section, Captain Wade Sullivan, Blake's commanding officer, shifted uncomfortably. He'd handpicked Cortland for this demonstration specifically because the sergeant was supposed to dominate. Sullivan had a lot riding on Blake's performance. The classified program Admiral Chen was evaluating for would reflect well on the entire unit if Blake was selected. But right now, Blake was losing composure, and that was worse than losing the match. Should we stop this? Walsh asked Admiral Chen quietly. Not yet, she replied, her eyes never leaving the ring. This is revealing. Revealing what? Character. The match was now 5 minutes old. Kate's breathing was still controlled, economical. Blake's was labored, frustrated. Sweat darkened his uniform while Kate's blue V-neck remained relatively dry. What's wrong, Sergeant? Kate asked softly, her voice pitched so only Blake could hear, not used to opponents who don't fold immediately. It was a calculated provocation, the kind of verbal jab that Kate rarely employed, but she needed Blake to make a mistake, a real one, because this match wasn't about winning anymore. It was about something larger. Blake's response was inarticulate rage. He charged like a linebacker, arms wide, intending to tackle Kate to the ground where his weight advantage would end things quickly. Kate sidestepped at the last possible second, and as Blake's momentum carried him past, she did something that made Master Chief Morrison's eyes widen. She tapped his shoulder, gently, almost playfully. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Half of them gasped. The other half erupted in shocked laughter. It was the ultimate insult in combat sports, the casual touch that said, I could have hit you, but I chose not to. Blake spun around, his face flushed crimson. Whatever control he'd maintained was gone now, burned away by humiliation and fury. You think this is funny? He snarled, his voice cracking. You think you're better than me? I think you're angry, Kate said calmly. And anger makes you sloppy. I'll show you sloppy. You. Blake never finished the sentence. He lunged forward with a wild haymaker, a punch thrown with no technique and maximum force. Kate ducked under it, stepped inside his guard, and executed a textbook hip throw that sent Blake crashing to the mat. The impact wasn't gentle, but it wasn't meant to be. Blake hit hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs, his eyes wide with shock. He'd been in hundreds of training matches. He'd never been thrown like that. The crowd was silent now. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was education. Blake climbed to his feet slowly, his breathing harsh. His ribs ached from the impact, but more painful was the realization blooming in his mind. He was outmatched. Yield, Kate said quietly. It wasn't a taunt. It was professional advice. No. Master Chief Morrison leaned toward the referee. You should stop this. On what grounds? On the grounds that Cortland is about to get hurt. The referee hesitated, his eyes moving between the two fighters. Blake was bigger, younger, theoretically more dangerous. But Kate stood there like a coiled spring, relaxed and ready, while Blake looked like he was about to explode. One more exchange, the referee decided. If he can't score, I'm calling it. Blake heard none of this. His world had contracted to a tunnel with Kate Brennan at the end of it. Every insult he'd ever weathered, every doubt about his capabilities, every moment of feeling inadequate, all of it focused on this one small woman who was making him look like a fool. He came in with a combination he'd practiced 10,000 times: jab cross, uppercut, low kick, spinning back fist. It was fast, technical, dangerous. Any one of those strikes could end a fight if it landed clean. None of them landed. Kate moved through his attack like water flowing around strikes, neutralizing angles, staying close enough to threaten, but never committing to an offense of her own. She was letting Blake exhaust himself, drain his tank burn, through whatever reserves of energy and pride still fueled him. "Fight back," Blake roared, his frustration boiling over. "Stop running and fight." "This is fighting," Kate replied, her voice maddeningly calm. "You just don't recognize it." That was the final straw. Blake's training, his discipline, his carefully cultivated warrior image, all of it shattered. He stopped thinking about technique or strategy or consequences. He just wanted to hurt the woman in front of him, to make her feel a fraction of the humiliation he was experiencing. He threw a strike at her throat, not a controlled demonstration strike, a real one delivered with intent to injure, to crush her windpipe, to drop her choking on the mat. It was the same strike that had killed men in dark alleys in Kabul and Mogadishu, the places where Blake had never actually served but liked to imply he had. The kind of strike that ended fights and sometimes lives. Kate saw it coming before Blake's neurons had finished firing. She'd survived 20 years in special operations by reading intent in body language, by processing threat assessment faster than conscious thought allowed. She didn't have time to be merciful. She only had time to survive. Her response was pure muscle memory drilled through 10,000 repetitions in training facilities that didn't officially exist. As Blake's strike came toward her throat, Kate rotated, caught his extended arm, and used his momentum to drive him forward and down. But she didn't just throw him. She applied pressure to specific points: elbow joint, wrist rotation, weight distribution with mathematical precision. Blake's knee hyperextended. His tibia, stressed beyond its structural tolerance, fractured in 2 places. The crack was sharp and clean, like breaking a thick branch. Blake's scream cut through the silence like a siren. He went down hard, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, his hands clutching at the injury as his brain struggled to process the explosion of pain radiating from his shin. The crowd collectively gasped, the sound like air being sucked from the training ground. Kate stepped back immediately. Her hands raised, her expression shifting from combat focus to professional concern in an instant. "Medic!" Master Chief Morrison was already moving, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. "Corpsman to the ring now!" Admiral Chen was on her feet, her face impassive but her eyes sharp, missing nothing. Captain Sullivan had gone pale, his career calculations recalibrating in real time. Captain Walsh just stared, his mouth slightly open. The referee rushed in, placing himself between Kate and Blake, though it was unnecessary. Kate had already shifted from combatant to something else. A professional assessing damage, cataloging injury, preparing to render aid if needed. Blake was still screaming, his tough guy persona completely destroyed by the reality of a compound fracture. His teammates rushed the ring surrounding him, casting hostile glances at Kate. "She broke his leg," one of them shouted. "You saw that she deliberately..." "She defended herself." Master Chief Morrison cut in sharply, his voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in the Navy. "Against a throat strike that could have killed her. Every one of you saw Cortland throw that strike. Every single one of you." The crowd was buzzing now, 800 voices creating a roar of confusion, shock, and competing narratives. Some saw exactly what Morrison described: a legitimate defense against a dangerous attack. Others saw what they wanted to see: a woman seriously injuring a decorated male sergeant. The medical team arrived immediately, beginning assessment and stabilization. Blake was still conscious but in shock, his skin clammy, his breathing rapid and shallow. "Compound fracture tibia and possibly fibula." The lead corpsman reported, his hands working quickly to immobilize the leg. "We need emergency transport to medical. Now. Secure the training ground." Admiral Chen commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Nobody leaves until my security team gets statements. Captain Walsh, lock down this area." "Yes, ma'am." Kate Kate stood alone in the ring now, her hands still raised in a neutral position, her blue V-neck shirt dark with sweat, but her expression composed. Inside, her heart was racing, but decades of operational experience had taught her to compartmentalize. Process later. Stay controlled now. Master Chief Morrison approached her carefully. "Kate, I know," she said quietly. "I should have pulled it. Could you have... I don't know. Maybe." Her voice was steady, but Morrison could hear the doubt underneath. "It happened so fast. He was aiming for my throat, and I just reacted. That's called self-defense. That's called ending someone's career." Morrison placed a hand on her shoulder. "He ended his own career the second he threw that strike. You just survived it." Admiral Chen was approaching now, her security detail flanking her. Kate straightened, shifting into a modified position of attention. Old habits died hard. "Lieutenant Commander Brennan," Admiral Chen said formally. "You'll need to come with me for debriefing." "Yes, ma'am." "And Kate," Admiral Chen's voice dropped slightly. "For what it's worth, I saw the whole thing. That was a clean defensive response to a prohibited strike. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Kate nodded, not trusting her voice. As she walked away from the ring, escorted by security, she caught fragments of conversation from the crowd. "Did you see how fast? Broke his leg like it was nothing? Throat strike, totally illegal. 55 years old, can you believe?" One voice rose above the others, belonging to a young female ensign. Kate didn't know. "That's what I'm talking about. That's what we can do." But Kate also heard the darker muttering, the angry voices talking about investigations and charges, and how a civilian instructor had no business seriously injuring active personnel regardless of the circumstances. As the medics loaded Blake Cortland onto a stretcher, his screams had subsided to whimpers, his face sheet white from pain and shock. His commanding officer, Captain Sullivan, walked alongside the stretcher, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes calculating. He was already thinking about how to spin this, how to control the narrative, how to protect his unit's reputation. In the chaos, almost nobody noticed the man in civilian clothes standing at the far edge of the crowd, his camera phone recording everything. His press credentials identified him as Marcus Webb, freelance military correspondent. But his real employer was TMZ's military division, and he'd just captured the most viral military training footage of the decade. By nightfall, the clip would have 3 million views. By morning, Kate Brennan would be the most famous and most controversial person in the United States military. But right now, as security led her away from the training ground, Kate was thinking about a night in Mogadishu, 15 years earlier, when she'd broken an enemy combatant's arm to prevent him from detonating a suicide vest. She'd saved 12 lives that night, including her own. She'd also spent the next 6 months in psychological counseling, learning to live with the sound of bones breaking in her memory. And now Master Chief Morrison walked beside her, his weathered face troubled. He'd served with Kate through 3 deployments, had seen her face down enemies in conditions that would break most people. But he'd also seen what it cost her, the quiet moments when the armor cracked and the real Kate emerged, the one who hated violence, who'd joined the military not for combat, but for service, who'd chosen SEAL training because it was the best way to save lives in the worst situations. "Doc," Kate said quietly, as they approached the administrative building, "tell me I didn't just destroy that kid's life." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "I can't tell you that, because I don't know yet." He paused. "But I can tell you this, Blake Cortland was heading for a reckoning. Better it happened in a controlled training environment than in an actual op where his lack of discipline could get people killed. That's cold comfort. It's the only comfort I've got." They reached the building entrance where Admiral Chen's security team was waiting. Beyond the doors lay a debriefing that would determine Kate's future, whether she'd face charges, whether her retirement would be honored or revoked, whether the last 20 years of service would be overshadowed by 30 seconds of violence. Kate took a deep breath, pulled her shoulders back, and walked through the doors. Behind her, the training ground was emptying slowly, hundreds of sailors processing what they'd witnessed. Some would defend Kate, others would vilify her. Most would simply be confused, unsure what to think when their preconceptions about age and gender and capability had just been shattered. And in an ambulance racing toward Naval Medical Center, San Diego Blake Cortland lay strapped to a gurney, morphine dulling but not eliminating the agony radiating from his shattered leg. His career, his pride, his carefully constructed self-image, all of it broken as completely as the bone. He stared at the ambulance ceiling, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down his face, and wondered how a grandmother in a faded blue shirt had just ended everything he'd worked for. He didn't yet understand that she hadn't ended anything. She'd just revealed what was already there, the fundamental hollowness at the core of his warrior persona, the toxic arrogance that mistook aggression for competence, the dangerous assumption that strength came from domination rather than discipline. Blake Cortland's education had just begun, and so had Kate Brennan's trial. The interrogation room wasn't technically an interrogation room, but Kate had been in enough of them to recognize the setup. Single table, 3 chairs, recording equipment mounted in the corner with a red light that never blinked. The walls were that particular shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to make people confess just to escape the monotony. Admiral Chen sat across from her, flanked by Commander Patricia Hayes from the Judge Advocate General's office. Hayes was 42, sharp-eyed, with the kind of methodical demeanor that made even innocent people nervous. For the record, Hayes began, her voice crisp. This is a preliminary inquiry into the incident that occurred at 1400 hours at Naval Special Warfare Command Training Facility. Lieutenant Commander Kate Brennan, retired civilian contractor. Do you understand you have the right to legal counsel? I understand. Do you wish to have counsel present? Kate met Hayes's eyes steadily. No, ma'am. I have nothing to hide. Then let's begin. Walk me through exactly what happened. Kate took a breath, organized her thoughts with the precision that had kept her alive through 2 decades of operations. Sergeant Blake Cortland and I were matched for a combat demonstration. Standard rules: no strikes to throat, groin, or eyes. Submission or incapacitation ends the match. And how did the match begin? Sergeant Cortland came in aggressive, attempting to use his size and strength advantage. I employed defensive evasion tactics to assess his fighting style. Hayes made a note. Defensive evasion. That's interesting phrasing. Multiple witnesses described it as running away. With respect, Commander, those witnesses don't understand defensive strategy. I was gathering intelligence on his attack patterns, waiting for an opening. An opening to break his leg. The question hung in the air like smoke. Kate's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. An opening to defend myself when he threw a prohibited strike at my throat. Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly. Tell us about that strike. Kate's hands were folded on the table, steady despite the memory flooding back. Approximately 6 minutes into the match, Sergeant Cortland's frustration escalated. His attacks became less controlled, more aggressive. His final strike was a direct thrust to my throat, full force intended to crush the windpipe. That's not a training technique. That's a combat kill strike. And your response? Instinctive. I redirected his momentum, applied a joint lock, and executed a takedown. The angle of the takedown resulted in his leg fracturing. Hayes's pen scratched across paper. Resulted in. Interesting word choice. Are you saying the fracture was accidental? Kate hesitated for the first time, and in that pause, years of combat experience warred with brutal honesty. I'm saying that when someone throws a lethal strike at you, you don't have time to calculate degrees of force. You respond with the techniques that will neutralize the threat. So you chose to break his leg. I chose to survive, Commander. The fracture was a consequence of that choice. The red light on the recording equipment seemed to pulse in the silence that followed. Admiral Chen's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes. Not judgment, but recognition. Let's talk about your background. Hayes continued, flipping through a file that Kate knew was heavily redacted. 20 years in SEAL team operations, multiple combat deployments, 3 Navy Crosses, Silver Stars, and a classified record that spans... She paused, scanning the blacked-out text, several continents and operations that I'm apparently not cleared to know about. That's correct, ma'am. Would you say your combat experience influenced your response today? My combat experience is the only reason Sergeant Cortland's strike didn't kill me, Commander. Hayes set down her pen and fixed Kate with a penetrating stare. Here's my problem, Lieutenant Commander. You're a 55-year-old retired operator serving as a civilian instructor. Sergeant Cortland is an active-duty SEAL in his physical prime, and yet within seconds you inflicted an injury that will likely end his career. That doesn't look like self-defense. That looks like excessive force. Kate's composure finally cracked just slightly. Would you prefer I'd let him collapse my trachea? Because that was the alternative, Commander. I had maybe half a second to respond. I chose the option that kept us both alive. Both alive, but only one of you walking. The words were a knife, precise and cutting. Kate felt them land somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where she kept all the operational guilt, all the necessary violence that haunted her quiet moments. Admiral Chen raised a hand, cutting through the tension. Commander Hayes, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we discuss charges or consequences, I'd like Lieutenant Commander Brennan to know something. She turned to Kate, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. The security footage has been reviewed by 3 separate analysts. All 3 concluded that Sergeant Cortland's final strike violated demonstration protocols and posed a genuine threat to your life. Your response, while resulting in serious injury, was within the parameters of legitimate self-defense. Kate's breath caught. Ma'am, you're not being charged, Kate. This is a formality, not a prosecution. The relief should have been immediate, overwhelming. Instead, Kate felt hollow. What about Cortland? That, Admiral Chen said carefully, is more complicated. Across the base in Naval Medical Center, San Diego's orthopedic surgery ward, Blake Cortland was learning exactly how complicated his life had become. The morphine made everything fuzzy around the edges, but not fuzzy enough to dull the reality settling over him like a burial shroud. His leg was destroyed, not just broken, destroyed. 2 pins, 3 screws, and a metal plate now held his tibia together. The surgeon, a tired-looking captain with steady hands and sympathetic eyes, had explained it all with the kind of gentle honesty that healthcare professionals reserved for career-ending injuries. You'll walk again, the surgeon had said. Maybe even run with enough physical therapy. But special operations, that's over, son. Blake had knotted his throat too tight for words. His mother sat beside the bed, her hand clutching his, her eyes red from crying. She was a retired Army nurse, had seen enough combat injuries to know what permanent damage looked like. Baby, I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know how much... Don't hope. Blake cut her off, his voice rough. Just don't. The door opened, admitting Captain Wade Sullivan. Blake's commanding officer looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 3 hours. His uniform was crisp as always, but the creases around his eyes had deepened into canyons. Sergeant Cortland, Mrs. Cortland, Sullivan nodded respectfully to Blake's mother. May I have a moment with your son? She looked at Blake, who nodded. After she left, Sullivan pulled a chair close to the bed and sat heavily, the movement of a man carrying weight that went beyond physical. How are you feeling? Like an idiot, sir. Sullivan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but acknowledgement. That's more self-awareness than I expected. The medical board will convene in 72 hours to evaluate your fitness for continued service. I'm required to inform you that based on preliminary assessments, you'll likely be medically retired. The words were a formality. Blake had already done the math. Yes, sir. There will also be an investigation into your conduct during the demonstration. Multiple witnesses reported that you threw a prohibited strike with intent to cause serious injury to a civilian contractor. Blake's chest tightened. Sir, I don't want to hear excuses, Sergeant. I want to hear the truth. Did you throw a kill strike at Lieutenant Commander Brennan? The morphine made it hard to lie, but Blake's pride made it hard to admit. He settled on something in between. I lost control, sir. She was making me look incompetent, in front of everyone who mattered, and I just snapped. So you attempted to seriously injure a woman who was serving as a training instructor authorized by this command because she made you feel incompetent. Hearing it said out loud made it sound even worse than Blake had imagined. "Yes, sir." Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped between his knees. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with disappointment. "I pushed for you, Cortland. I told Admiral Chen you were ready for that classified program. I vouched for your character, your discipline, your judgment, and you proved me wrong in the most public, spectacular way possible. I know, sir. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't rebuild careers, Sergeant, mine or yours." Sullivan stood his chair, scraping against the floor. "You'll receive official notification of the investigation within 48 hours. Until then, focus on healing. And Cortland, sir, think about what really made you throw that strike. Because from where I'm sitting, it wasn't Brennan's skill that broke you. It was your own ego." After Sullivan left, Blake stared at the ceiling, his mother's hand back in his tears, burning behind his eyes. The morphine pulled at him, promising escape into unconscious darkness, but his mind wouldn't let go of the images replaying on an endless loop. Kate Brennan's calm expression as she evaded his strikes, the almost casual way she'd redirected his energy. The split second when he'd thrown that throat strike and known even as he committed to it that he'd crossed a line. And then the crack. The explosion of pain. The humiliation of screaming in front of 800 people who'd watched him talk so much trash. His phone buzzed on the bedside table. Despite his mother's protests, Blake checked it. Text messages, dozens of them, from teammates and friends and people he barely knew. Most were supportive. "Get well soon, brother," and "She got lucky, you'll bounce back." But a few cut deeper, one from a female petty officer he'd harassed 6 months ago. "Karma's a bitch, isn't it, Blake?" Another from a sailor whose sister had been assaulted by a male superior. "Maybe now you know what it feels like to be overpowered. Think about that." Blake deleted both messages, but their words lingered like infection. Back in the administrative building, Kate was learning about the consequences that had nothing to do with official charges. "The video is viral," Admiral Chen said, pulling up her tablet to show Kate. 3 million views and climbing. Someone recorded the whole thing and sold it to military news outlets. Kate watched herself on the small screen, watched Blake's strike come toward her throat, watched her own response. Clinical, precise, devastating. The clip ended with Blake on the ground screaming his leg at that terrible angle. The comments section was a war zone. "She's a hero. Showed that sexist pig what women can do. This is what happens when we put women in combat roles. Someone always gets hurt. 55 years old and she destroyed him. Respect. She should be arrested. That was excessive force. Cortland threw a kill strike. She defended herself. End of story. If the genders were reversed, he'd be in prison right now." Kate stopped reading. The internet had opinions about everything, and none of them mattered compared to the real consequences. "It gets worse," Commander Hayes said, pulling up another screen. "Fox News is running a segment tonight. Danger in the ranks when female instructors attack. CNN is countering with SEAL assaults, civilian trainer gets what he deserves. This is becoming a political football." "Jesus," Kate muttered. "The Secretary of the Navy has requested a full briefing. The Senate Armed Services Committee is talking about hearings." Admiral Chen's expression was grim. "Like it or not, Kate, you're the face of a very contentious debate right now." "I don't want to be the face of anything, Admiral. I just want to teach defensive tactics and honor my contract. That contract is currently under review. The base commander received 47 complaints in the past 2 hours demanding your termination. He also received 33 letters supporting you and requesting expanded training programs." Admiral Chen leaned back, rubbing her temples. "You've managed to unite and divide this entire base simultaneously. That's almost impressive. What happens now? Now we wait. The investigation runs its course. The media circus eventually moves on to the next scandal. And somewhere in all that chaos, we figure out what your role here actually is." Admiral Chen paused, her eyes sharp. "But I'll tell you what won't happen. You won't be sacrificed to political convenience. You defended yourself against a prohibited attack. That's the truth, and I'll defend that truth regardless of who finds it inconvenient." Kate felt something loosen in her chest, not quite relief, but something close. "Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. This fight is just beginning." Master Chief Morrison was waiting for Kate outside the administrative building. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed too beautiful for a day that had gone so wrong. "How'd it go?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "I'm not being charged. Yet." "That's something. Blake's career is over, Doc, and it's my fault." Morrison stopped walking, forcing Kate to stop as well. His weathered face was stern in the fading light. "Listen to me. Blake Cortland's career ended the second he decided to throw a lethal strike during a training demonstration. You didn't make that choice. He did. You just survived it. I could have pulled that takedown differently. I could have what? Let him crush your windpipe to protect his feelings. Kate, you're one of the best operators I've ever served with, but your compassion has always been your blind spot. Some people need to learn lessons the hard way. Blake Cortland just got his." They walked in silence for a while, the base settling into evening routines around them. Sailors heading to chow halls, vehicles moving along access roads, the distant sound of a training exercise wrapping up. "I heard something interesting," Morrison said eventually. "Blake's got a cousin. Michelle Cortland just finished boot camp. She was there today in the crowd." Kate's head snapped up. "Was she?" "She requested a meeting with you. Wants to talk about joining the special warfare training pipeline." After watching me break her cousin's leg. Morrison's smile was grim. "Because she watched you break her cousin's leg. Apparently Blake's been telling her for years that women aren't cut out for combat roles. She wants you to prove him wrong." Kate didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This day just keeps getting stranger. Welcome to the modern military. Nothing makes sense, everyone's offended, and the only constant is that somebody's always watching. Morrison's expression softened. "But for what it's worth, Kate, I'd rather have you training the next generation than 100 Blake Cortlands. Because you teach them what actually matters. Discipline over aggression, skill over strength, survival over ego." They reached Kate's quarters, a modest single-room unit, in the civilian contractor housing. Morrison lingered, his eyes troubled. "What is it, Doc?" "There's something you should know. Captain Sullivan was banking everything on Blake getting selected for that classified program. His unit's reputation, his own promotion, prospects, everything. And now that's gone up in smoke. So he'll blame me." "He already does. Be careful, Kate. Desperate officers do stupid things." After Morrison left, Kate sat on her bunk in the gathering darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. Her hands were steady now, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving behind the familiar hollow exhaustion that followed violence. She thought about Blake Cortland in his hospital bed, facing a future he'd never imagined. She thought about Captain Sullivan and whatever retribution he might be planning. She thought about the viral video and the political circus and the Senate hearings that would dissect her split-second decision frame by frame. But mostly, she thought about a night 15 years ago in Mogadishu when she'd broken an enemy combatant's arm to save 12 lives. She'd carried that guilt for years, the weight of necessary violence, the question of whether she could have chosen differently. Her therapist at the time, a patient Air Force colonel who specialized in combat trauma, had told her something Kate had never forgotten. You can't carry responsibility for other people's choices. You can only own your own. Blake Cortland had made his choice when he threw that strike. Kate had made hers when she survived it. Everything that came after the investigation, the media, the ruined careers and political fallout, was just the universe working out the mathematics of those two decisions. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "This is Michelle Cortland. I know you probably don't want to hear from any Cortlands right now, but I'd really like to talk to you. Not about Blake, about me. About what I saw today. Please." Kate stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response. "Tomorrow. So 800. Building 147, Conference Room B. Come ready to work." The reply was instant. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Kate set the phone down and finally turned on the lights. Her reflection in the darkened window looked tired, older than 55, carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical load. But she was still standing. Still here. Still capable of teaching the next generation, of turning her own pain into lessons that might prevent someone else's. Tomorrow she'd meet Michelle Cortland and probably be reminded of Blake with every word, every gesture. Tomorrow the investigation would continue, and the media circus would reach new heights of absurdity. Tomorrow, Captain Sullivan would probably make his move, whatever that turned out to be. But tonight, Kate Brennan was just a woman who'd survived another day in a career built on survival. And sometimes, that was enough. 3 miles away, Blake Cortland drifted into morphine-soaked sleep, his dreams full of falling of strikes that never landed, of a small woman in a blue shirt who moved like smoke and struck like lightning. His mother sat in the chair beside his bed, watching her son sleep, wondering how the confident warrior who'd left home had become this broken, humiliated man. She'd seen enough combat casualties to know that some wounds were visible and others were not. Blake's leg would heal. She wasn't sure about the rest of him. And in her office, Admiral Margaret Chen reviewed security footage for the 4th time, watching the incident from multiple angles, analyzing every frame of those final seconds. She'd been in military leadership long enough to recognize a watershed moment when she saw one. This wasn't just about one injured sergeant or one controversial instructor. This was about decades of tension finally breaking through the surface, questions about women in combat, about military culture, about what strength really meant and who got to define it. Kate Brennan hadn't asked to be a symbol, but symbols rarely got to choose themselves. They were chosen by history, by circumstance, by the moment when someone stood at an intersection of competing narratives and refused to move. Admiral Chen closed the laptop, the images still burning in her mind. Tomorrow, she'd have to brief the Secretary of the Navy, navigate the political minefield, protect Kate from those who wanted to make an example of her while managing those who wanted to make her a hero. Tonight, she just felt tired. Tired of fighting the same battles decade after decade. Tired of watching capable women prove themselves again and again, only to have their competence questioned the moment it made men uncomfortable. But tired or not, she'd fight. Because Kate Brennan had earned it. And because the next generation of female sailors deserved better than endless justification for their presence in uniform. The base settled into nighttime rhythms, watch rotations, changing security patrols, making rounds, the distant sound of waves against the shore. Somewhere in the darkness, 800 sailors were processing what they'd witnessed, forming opinions, choosing sides, preparing for the conversations and confrontations that would follow. And at the center of it all, mostly unaware of the storm building around her, Kate Brennan slept the dreamless sleep of operational exhaustion. Her body remembering what her mind tried to forget: the mathematics of violence, the geometry of survival, the price paid for 30 seconds that changed everything. Morning came too early, sunlight cutting through Kate's window like an accusation. She'd slept maybe 3 hours, her dreams full of Blake Cortland's scream and the sound of bone breaking. The clock read 0545. She had 15 minutes before her morning run, a ritual she'd maintained for 30 years, regardless of what the previous day had brought. Her phone was already buzzing with messages. 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, probably media, and a text from Master Chief Morrison. "Don't talk to anyone. Sullivan's making moves." Kate dressed quickly, lacing her running shoes with hands that were steady despite the knot in her stomach. Whatever Sullivan was planning, she'd face it head on. Running from problems had never been her style. She stepped outside into the cool morning air and nearly collided with a reporter. "Lieutenant Commander Brennan, Jessica Martinez, Navy Times. Can you comment on the incident yesterday? Do you regret breaking Sergeant Cortland's leg?" 2 more reporters materialized from a van parked across the street, cameras already rolling. Kate's training kicked in. Identify the threat, assess the situation. Choose the response that maximized survival. "No comment," she said firmly, starting her run. They followed her for the first quarter mile, shouting questions that echoed across the empty training grounds. "Is it true you have a history of violent incidents? Did you deliberately target Sergeant Cortland because of his gender? Should women your age be teaching hand-to-hand combat?" Kate kept running, her pace steady, refusing to engage. Eventually, they gave up their rental car, peeling away to hunt for easier prey. But the damage was done. The media circus had arrived, and it was camping on her doorstep. Building 147 was quiet when Kate arrived at 0755, 5 minutes early for her meeting with Michelle Cortland. She made coffee in the break room, the familiar ritual grounding her in routine. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the silence with normalcy. Michelle arrived at exactly 0800, her uniform pressed to perfection. Her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that reminded Kate painfully of Blake. But where Blake's eyes had held arrogance and barely controlled aggression, Michelle's showed something different. Determination mixed with uncertainty, hope fighting against fear. "Thank you for meeting with me, ma'am," Michelle said, standing at attention. "Sit down, Cortland. This isn't a formal interview." Kate handed her a cup of coffee. "Though I have to ask, why do you want to talk to the woman who put your cousin in the hospital?" Michelle wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, steam rising between them. "Because Blake's been lying to me for years. He told me women couldn't handle special operations, that we weren't built for it, that I should stick to admin roles and leave the fighting to men." She looked up, her eyes sharp. "Then I watched you evade every single one of his attacks like he was moving in slow motion. I watched you take him down in 2 seconds when you finally decided to engage. And I realized everything he'd told me was bullshit." Wow. Kate felt something shift in her chest. "Your cousin threw a kill strike at me, Michelle. You understand that, right? What happened to him was self-defense, not a demonstration." "I know. I saw it. Everyone saw it except the people who don't want to see it." Michelle leaned forward. "Blake's not a bad person, ma'am. But he's been drinking the Kool-Aid for so long he doesn't know which way is up anymore. He needed someone to show him the truth. I'm just sorry it had to be that painful." "Are you sorry?" Michelle considered the question with the kind of honesty Kate respected. "Part of me is. He's family and I don't like seeing him hurt. But another part of me, the part that's been listening to him and guys like him tell me I'm not good enough for years, that part is relieved. Because now I know it's possible. If you can do what you did at 55, I can damn sure do it at 22. Kate studied the young woman across from her, seeing echoes of her younger self, the same hunger to prove herself, the same stubborn refusal to accept limitations others tried to impose. Special warfare training is brutal, Cortland. 80% washout rate. And that's before you factor in the additional scrutiny you'll face as a woman. Every mistake gets magnified. Every success gets dismissed as luck or lowered standards. I know, ma'am. Do you? Because I spent 20 years fighting twice as hard for half the recognition. I've been called every name you can imagine. I've had teammates refuse to work with me, commanders try to sabotage my career, and countless men like your cousin assume I slept my way to every achievement. Kate's voice was steady, but decades of accumulated frustration bled through. And yesterday, when I defended myself against an attack that could have killed me, half the military wants me charged with assault, while the other half wants to make me a poster child for women in combat. Nobody seems interested in the fact that I'm just a person trying to do my job. Michelle set down her coffee cup. Then help me be different, ma'am. Help me be the kind of operator who's so undeniably competent that the excuses run out. Before Kate could respond, her phone buzzed. Text from Admiral Chen. My office. Now. Sullivan filed formal complaint. Kate stood her coffee forgotten. We'll continue this conversation later. Cortland. Right now I need to deal with your cousin's commanding officer trying to end my career. Ma'am. Michelle's voice stopped Kate at the door. Whatever Sullivan's claiming, it's crap. I'll testify to that if you need me to. You'd testify against your cousin's CO to defend the woman who broke his leg. I'd testify to the truth, ma'am, which is that Blake screwed up and you saved his life by not killing him when you could have. Kate nodded once, a gesture of respect between warriors, and headed for the door. Behind her, Michelle Cortland sat alone in the conference room, staring at her reflection in the dark coffee, wondering if she had the strength to walk the path Kate had carved through institutional resistance. Admiral Chen's office was standing room only when Kate arrived. Besides, the Admiral Commander Hayes from JAG was there, along with Captain Wade Sullivan, looking freshly pressed and ready for battle. Master Chief Morrison stood against the back wall, his expression dark as thunderclouds. Lieutenant Commander Brennan, Admiral Chen said formally, Captain Sullivan has filed a formal complaint alleging that you used excessive force against Sergeant Cortland, deliberately targeted him for injury, and created a hostile training environment. He's requesting your immediate termination and potential criminal charges. Kate kept her voice level. That's quite a list, Captain. Care to provide evidence? Sullivan stepped forward, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. The evidence is Sergeant Cortland's shattered leg, Lieutenant Commander. The evidence is a promising young SEAL whose career you destroyed because he bruised your ego. He threw a kill strike at my throat. So you claim. Funny how the only person who interpreted it that way is the one who benefited from that interpretation. Master Chief Morrison pushed off the wall. I saw it too, Captain. Clear as day. Cortland violated demonstration protocols and attacked with lethal intent. You would say that, Master Chief. You and Brennan served together. You're protecting your friend. I'm protecting the truth. Sullivan spun on Morrison. The truth is that a civilian contractor seriously injured one of my best men during what should have been a routine training exercise. The truth is that I vouched for Brennan's hire, and she made me look like a fool. The truth is that her presence on this base has become a liability that endangers my unit's reputation and mission readiness. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the rising tension like a blade. Captain Sullivan, your unit's reputation was damaged the moment Sergeant Cortland threw a prohibited strike during a recorded demonstration. Your mission readiness was compromised when your hand-picked soldier lost his composure so completely he attempted to seriously injure a civilian instructor. Those are failures of leadership, not training. Sullivan's face flushed red. With respect, Admiral, my leadership isn't on trial here. Isn't it? Admiral Chen pulled up her tablet, turning it so everyone could see. I've received 47 formal complaints about Lieutenant Commander Brennan. Interesting how 32 of them came from members of your unit. Captain and all were filed within an hour of each other using nearly identical language. That suggests coordination. That suggests you ordered your men to file complaints. The room went silent. Sullivan's flush deepened. I encouraged my unit to report concerns through proper channels. You manufactured a paper trail to justify removing an instructor who embarrassed you. Admiral Chen's tone was ice. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. Admiral, my men have legitimate concerns about... Your men watched their teammate throw a lethal strike and are now trying to rewrite history to avoid accountability. I've reviewed the security footage with 3 independent analysts. All 3 concluded that Lieutenant Commander Brennan's response was appropriate self-defense. This complaint is without merit. Sullivan's hands clenched at his sides. Then I'm requesting a formal review board. Let an impartial panel examine the evidence and make the determination. Request denied. Ma'am, you're dismissed, Captain. And Sullivan. Admiral Chen's voice dropped to a register that made even Kate tense. If I discover you've retaliated against Lieutenant Commander Brennan in any way, if you've encouraged harassment or created obstacles to her work, I will personally ensure your next assignment involves inventory management in Alaska. Are we clear? Sullivan's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Crystal, ma'am. After he left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame, Commander Hayes spoke for the first time. He's going to be a problem, Admiral. Let him be a problem. I've dealt with angry captains before. Admiral Chen turned to Kate. How are you holding up? I've had better weeks, ma'am. I imagine so. Unfortunately, it's about to get worse. The Senate Armed Services Committee has requested your testimony regarding women in special operations. Apparently, your incident has become Exhibit A in a larger debate. Kate's stomach dropped. When? 2 weeks. They want you in Washington to answer questions about training protocols, gender integration, and the incident with Cortland. Admiral Chen's expression was sympathetic. I know this isn't what you signed up for, Kate. But like it or not, you've become important to a lot of people. The question is whether you're willing to carry that weight. Kate thought about Michelle Cortland, about all the young women who'd watched the video and seen possibility instead of violence. She thought about her own struggles, the decades of fighting for recognition, the countless times she'd wanted to quit but pushed through anyway. I'll testify, ma'am. Good. Because we need voices like yours in that room. Commander Hayes will help you prepare. Admiral Chen paused. One more thing. The classified program that Cortland was being evaluated for, I'm recommending you for the senior instructor position. Kate blinked. Ma'am, you've got the operational experience, the teaching skills, and apparently the ability to defend yourself against hostile actors. That's exactly what the program needs. Admiral Chen's smile was thin. Plus, it would really piss off Captain Sullivan, which I find deeply satisfying. After the meeting, Master Chief Morrison walked with Kate across the base toward the training facilities. The morning sun was climbing, heat already building despite the ocean breeze. That could have gone worse, Morrison offered. Could have gone better too. Sullivan's not going to let this go, Kate. He's got too much ego invested. I know. They walked in silence for a while, passing groups of sailors who stared at Kate with expressions ranging from admiration to hostility. The base had divided itself into camps overnight, Team Brennan and Team Cortland, and the tension was thick enough to taste. I heard from an old friend in Cortland's unit, Morrison said quietly. Blake's taking it hard. Not just the physical injury, the whole thing. Apparently, he's been replaying that fight in his head non-stop, trying to figure out how you dismantled him so easily. He's a good fighter, Kate said honestly. Strong, fast, technically proficient. His problem was never skill. Then what was it? He fought angry. Anger makes you predictable. Kate stopped walking, turning to face Morrison. You know what I kept thinking during that match? That Blake Cortland never learned the difference between aggression and violence. Aggression is posturing, intimidation, dominance, displays. Violence is functional. You use it when there's no other option, and you use exactly enough to solve the problem. Blake was all aggression. When I finally deployed actual violence, he had no answer for it. Morrison's weathered face creased with understanding. You're saying he's been bluffing his whole career? I'm saying he's never faced a situation where his size and strength and male privilege weren't enough to win. Yesterday was the first time someone called his bluff, and it broke him. Literally. Kate's expression darkened. I don't need jokes about it, Doc. That kid's career is over because of me. That kid's career is over because of him, Morrison corrected firmly. How many times do I need to say it before you believe it? Before Kate could answer, her phone rang. Unknown number, but something made her answer. Is this Lieutenant Commander Brennan? The voice was female, older, with the kind of steel underneath that Kate recognized from her own mother. Speaking. This is Margaret Cortland, Blake's mother. Kate's heart rate spiked. Mrs. Cortland, I wanted to thank you. The word stopped Kate cold. I'm sorry. I wanted to thank you for not killing my son. Margaret Cortland's voice was steady, professional, the voice of a retired army nurse who'd seen enough combat casualties to know exactly how bad things could have been. I've watched the video a dozen times. That strike he threw at you, that was meant to crush your windpipe, and you had every right to respond with lethal force, but you didn't. You broke his leg instead of his neck, so thank you. Kate leaned against a nearby building, her legs suddenly unsteady. Mrs. Cortland, I never wanted to hurt your son. I know, that's why I'm calling. Because Blake's lying in that hospital bed feeling sorry for himself, convinced he's the victim in all this, and someone needs to tell him the truth. Margaret's voice hardened. Someone needs to tell him that his arrogance nearly got him killed, that his toxic attitude toward women finally caught up with him, and that the only reason he's alive to feel sorry for himself is because the woman he attacked showed more restraint than he deserved. Are you asking me to talk to him? God, no. He's not ready to hear anything from you yet. Maybe he never will be. Margaret sighed, the sound heavy with maternal frustration. I'm calling because I want you to know that not everyone blames you. Some of us understand what really happened, and some of us are grateful that our sons are getting the education we failed to give them. After the call ended, Kate stood motionless for a long moment, processing the unexpected grace from a mother whose son she'd seriously injured. Morrison waited patiently, understanding that some moments needed silence. Finally, Kate straightened. I need to get to the training facility. I've got a class in 20 minutes. You sure you're ready to face a room full of sailors right now? No, but when was I ever ready for anything in this career? The training facility was packed when Kate arrived. 40 sailors assembled for her defensive tactics seminar. The energy in the room was strange, not hostile exactly, but charged with curiosity and unspoken questions. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone had opinions. Kate stood at the front of the room, meeting their eyes one by one. I know what you're all thinking. You're wondering if I'm going to address the elephant in the room. The answer is yes, briefly, and then we're moving on because we have work to do. She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. Yesterday, during a demonstration, I was attacked with a prohibited strike. I defended myself using techniques that resulted in serious injury to my opponent. The incident is under investigation, but I've been cleared of wrongdoing. Some of you will agree with that determination, others won't. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinions. A hand shot up. Male sailor, early 20s, with the kind of skeptical expression Kate had seen 1,000 times before. Ma'am, how do we know you didn't overreact? How do we know it was really self-defense? You don't, Kate said simply. You weren't inside my head. You didn't feel the threat assessment happening in real time. All you have is video footage and witness testimony and your own interpretation of events. But here's what I can tell you: when someone throws a strike at your throat with intent to cause serious injury, you have a fraction of a second to respond. You don't get to consult a manual or debate the appropriate level of force. You act based on your training and your instinct to survive. That's what I did. Another hand. Female petty officer, her expression more sympathetic. Ma'am, do you regret how it turned out? Kate considered lying, giving the politically safe answer. But these sailors deserved honesty. I regret that Sergeant Cortland was injured. I regret that his career is likely over. I regret that what should have been a learning demonstration became a viral video that's turned into political theater. She paused. But I don't regret surviving, and I won't apologize for refusing to let someone hurt me just because it would be more convenient for everyone if I had. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the assembled sailors like morning fog. Now, Kate continued, her voice shifting to instructor mode, we're going to talk about the difference between aggressive posturing and actual threat assessment. Because one of the biggest mistakes inexperienced fighters make is confusing intimidation with danger. Someone who's loud and aggressive might not be a threat. Someone who's quiet and controlled might be lethal. Learning to tell the difference can save your life. The class proceeded with surprising normalcy after that. Kate demonstrated techniques, corrected form, answered questions. The sailors responded with the kind of focused attention that came from realizing their instructor wasn't just talking theory. She was teaching lessons written in experience and, yes, in Sergeant Blake Cortland's shattered tibia. During a water break, the female petty officer who'd asked about regrets approached Kate quietly. Ma'am, can I ask you something off the record? Go ahead. How do you deal with it? The hate, I mean. I've been reading the comments online and some of them are brutal. People saying terrible things about you. Kate took a long drink of water, buying time to formulate an answer that was honest but not demoralizing. You want the truth. It sucks. Every single time. You never get used to people saying you're too weak or too aggressive or too female or too old. You never get numb to the death threats or the rape threats or the casual suggestions that you should shut up and go away. She met the young woman's eyes. But you know what's worse? Letting those voices control your actions. Letting fear of criticism prevent you from doing your job. That's how they win, not by stopping you directly, but by making you stop yourself. How do you not let it get to you? I didn't say it doesn't get to me. I said I don't let it control me. There's a difference. Kate smiled slightly. And I have good people around me who remind me what's true when the noise gets too loud. Find those people, petty officer. Build that network, because you can't do this alone. The class resumed and Kate pushed through the remaining 2 hours on autopilot, her instructor persona carrying her when her actual energy flagged. By the time she dismissed the sailors, she felt hollowed out, running on fumes and stubborn will. Master Chief Morrison was waiting outside. Admiral Chen wants to see you again. Something's happened. Kate's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by sharp alertness. What kind of something? The kind that involves lawyers and press conferences and the Secretary of the Navy. Admiral Chen's office was even more crowded than before. Commander Hayes was there along with 2 civilians. Kate didn't recognize a man and woman in expensive suits with the kind of predatory alertness that screamed legal expertise. "Kate, these are the Navy's legal representatives for your Senate testimony," Admiral Chen said without preamble. "They need to brief you on some developments." The male lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth and professional. "Lieutenant Commander Brennan, we've received information that several media outlets are planning coordinated coverage of your testimony. They're framing it as a referendum on women in combat roles with you as the central figure." "I already knew that," Kate said. "What you don't know," the female lawyer continued, "is that Captain Sullivan has been talking to certain members of the committee, members who are already skeptical about gender integration in special operations. He's been providing them with selective information designed to make you look reckless and dangerous." Kate's hands clenched. "Of course he has." "There's more," Admiral Chen said grimly. "Blake Cortland is also being called to testify, and according to our sources, he's planning to claim that you deliberately targeted him, that the throat strike was accidental or exaggerated, and that you used excessive force because you have a history of violence against male service members." The words hit Kate like physical blows. "That's a lie. I've never—" "We know," Commander Hayes said quickly. "We've pulled your entire service record. It's spotless. But Cortland and Sullivan are betting that a congressional hearing is more about optics than facts. A young, injured male SEAL versus a middle-aged female instructor. They think the narrative will play in their favor." Kate felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So what do we do?" The male lawyer leaned forward. "We fight back. We prepare you to testify, we line up witnesses to counter their narrative, and we make sure the truth comes out." He paused. "But I'll be honest, Lieutenant Commander, this is going to get ugly. They're going to attack your character, your service record, your competence. They're going to make you defend yourself on live television in front of millions of people. Are you prepared for that?" Kate thought about 20 years in special operations, about missions that didn't officially exist, and enemies who'd tried to kill her in a dozen different countries. She thought about every time she'd faced down skepticism and prejudice and outright hostility, every time she'd had to prove herself to people who'd already decided she wasn't good enough. "I've been preparing for that my whole career," she said quietly. "Bring it on." The next 12 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like psychological warfare than legal strategy. Kate spent 8 hours a day in conference rooms with the Navy's legal team rehearsing answers to questions designed to make her look either incompetent or vicious. They threw everything at her hypotheticals about excessive force questions about her age and physical capabilities, implications that she had something to prove because of her gender. "Why didn't you just avoid the strike entirely?" the female lawyer asked for the 100th time, playing the role of hostile senator. "I did avoid 27 strikes before that one," Kate replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "The 28th was aimed at my throat with enough force to collapse my trachea. I had 0.3 seconds to respond. I chose survival." "But you could have just moved away." His momentum was already committed. "Moving away would have put me off balance, vulnerable to a follow-up strike. The takedown was the safest option for both of us." "Safest?" The lawyer's tone dripped skepticism. "He has a shattered leg." "He has a shattered leg instead of a crushed windpipe." "Yes, I consider that safer." The male lawyer nodded approvingly. "Good, stay with that. Factual, unemotional, focused on threat assessment. Don't let them bait you into defending yourself emotionally." But Kate was already emotionally defending herself in the quiet hours alone in her quarters when the rehearsed answers fell away, and she was left with the truth she'd seriously injured a man, ended his career, and now had to convince strangers that it was necessary. The weight of it pressed down on her chest like physical mass. Master Chief Morrison checked on her every evening, bringing coffee and the kind of grounding presence that only came from shared combat experience. On the 7th night of preparation, he found Kate staring at her laptop, watching the viral video for what must have been the 1,000th time. "You need to stop watching that," he said gently. "I'm looking for what I could have done differently. Kate, we've been through this. You did everything right." "Did I?" She paused the video at the moment of impact, Blake's leg bending at that terrible angle. "Because that doesn't look right, Doc. That looks like I destroyed a kid's future. Morrison sat down heavily, his age showing in the movement. You want to know what I see when I watch that video? I see a split-second decision made by someone with 20 years of experience facing a life-threatening attack. I see textbook defensive technique executed under pressure, and I see a young man who's alive because you showed restraint. He paused. You know what I don't see? Malice, revenge, excessive force. None of the things they're going to accuse you of. They're going to destroy me up there, aren't they? Maybe. Probably. Morrison's honesty was brutal but necessary. But you've survived worse than congressional hearings. You've survived actual combat, Kate. This is just politics, with better lighting. On the 9th day of preparation, Kate received an unexpected visitor. Michelle Cortland appeared at the door of the conference room during a break, her expression determined but nervous. Ma'am, I know you're busy, but I need to tell you something. Kate gestured to a chair. What is it, Cortland? Blake called me last night, from the hospital. Michelle's hands twisted in her lap. He's a mess, ma'am. Physically, emotionally, everything. The doctors say he'll never pass the physical requirements for special operations again. He's being medically retired. Kate's chest tightened. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be, not yet. Michelle looked up, her eyes fierce. Because he also told me what he's planning to say at the hearing. And ma'am, it's garbage. He's going to claim you overreacted, that his strike wasn't aimed at your throat, that you deliberately injured him because you wanted to make an example. I know, we've been preparing for that. But you don't know why. Michelle leaned forward. Captain Sullivan visited him 3 days ago, spent 2 hours in that hospital room. When he left, Blake called me crying actual tears, saying Sullivan promised to take care of him, get him a cushy civilian contractor position, make sure he had a future. All he had to do was testify that you were dangerous and shouldn't be teaching. The pieces clicked into place with ugly clarity. Sullivan wasn't just trying to remove Kate, he was using Blake's desperation to do it, exploiting a broken man's fear of an uncertain future. Did Blake tell you this directly? He did. And he told me he's going to do it anyway because he doesn't see another option. Michelle's voice cracked. Ma'am, I love my cousin, but he's about to commit perjury because he's scared and Sullivan's manipulating that fear. I can't let that happen. Kate studied the young woman, seeing the same internal conflict she'd faced 100 times in her career, the tension between loyalty to individuals and loyalty to truth. What are you asking me, Cortland? I'm asking for permission to testify, to tell them what Blake told me, to expose what Sullivan's doing. That would destroy your relationship with your cousin. I know. Tears welled in Michelle's eyes but didn't fall. But lying to protect him would destroy me, and it would let Sullivan win. Kate called Admiral Chen immediately. Within hours, Michelle Cortland was added to the witness list, her testimony classified as relevant to questions of command influence and witness intimidation. Sullivan would have no warning until Michelle took the stand. The legal team spent the next 2 days preparing Michelle, teaching her how to stay calm under aggressive questioning, how to answer only what was asked, how to resist the pressure to backtrack or soften her testimony. Kate watched the young woman transform from nervous recruit to determined witness, finding steel in herself she didn't know existed. Your cousin's going to hate you for this, the male lawyer warned Michelle during a practice session. I know, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Michelle's voice was steady. Besides, maybe this is what Blake needs. Maybe hitting rock bottom means realizing Sullivan doesn't care about him. He just wants to use him. On the morning of the hearing, Kate stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her uniform for the last time. She'd chosen to wear her dress whites, every ribbon and medal perfectly placed. The Navy Cross sat above her left breast pocket, earned in an operation in Somalia that still gave her nightmares. The silver stars flanked it, representing 2 different missions where she'd saved her team by refusing to quit when quitting was the logical choice. She barely recognized the woman in the mirror. 55 years old, pale blonde hair now threaded with more gray than she remembered, lines around her eyes that told stories of decisions made in fractions of seconds. She looked tired. She looked her age. She looked like someone who'd spent 2 decades fighting wars that never made the news. You ready for this? Master Chief Morrison asked from the doorway. He was wearing his own dress uniform, attending as a character witness if needed. No, Kate said honestly. But I'm going anyway. The hearing room was exactly as intimidating as Kate had imagined. High ceilings, ornate wood paneling, banks of seats filled with media, military personnel, and civilians who'd come to witness the spectacle. The Senate Armed Services Committee sat at an elevated bench, 7 senators whose combined political power could end careers with a single recommendation. Kate took her seat at the witness table, a microphone in front of her, cameras trained on her face from multiple angles. Somewhere in the room was Blake Courtland, though she couldn't see him from her position. Somewhere else was Captain Sullivan, probably coaching his chosen witnesses, preparing his manufactured narrative. Senator Patricia Hawkins, the committee chair, gavelled the hearing to order. At 68, Hawkins was a former Air Force officer herself, someone who'd broken barriers in her own time. But her expression gave nothing away as she looked at Kate. This hearing will examine the incident at Naval Special Warfare Command on October 15th, questions surrounding appropriate use of force in training environments and broader implications for gender integration in special operations. Lieutenant Commander Kate Brennan, please stand and be sworn in. Kate stood, raising her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent half her career in situations where the truth couldn't be told, operations that didn't officially exist, missions where lying was survival. Now she was promising complete honesty in a room full of people who'd use that honesty as ammunition. Senator Hawkins began the questioning. Lieutenant Commander Brennan, please describe in your own words what happened during the demonstration. Kate took a breath and launched into the prepared testimony, walking through the match step by step: Blake's initial aggression, his escalating frustration the moment when he lost control and threw a strike aimed at her throat. She described her defensive response, the takedown, the fracture. Her voice remained steady, clinical, focused on facts rather than emotions. And did you intend to break Sergeant Courtland's leg? Senator Hawkins asked. I intended to neutralize a threat to my life, ma'am. The fracture was a consequence of the technique required to accomplish that goal in the available time frame. Could you have used less force, not without accepting significantly higher risk to my own safety? Senator Marcus Webb, no relation to the reporter who'd first leaked the video, leaned forward, his expression skeptical. Webb was known for his conservative views on military policy and his vocal opposition to women in combat roles. Lieutenant Commander, you're 55 years old. You weigh what, maybe 120 soaking wet. And you're telling this committee that you felt genuinely threatened by a trained SEAL in his physical prime. Kate met his eyes. Senator, with respect, that question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how combat works. Size and strength matter, but they're not determinative. Technique, experience, and the ability to read an opponent matter more. I have 20 years of operational experience. I know how to assess threats, and I knew that Sergeant Courtland's strike could have killed me. Or maybe, Webb said, his tone sharpening, you saw an opportunity to make a political statement, to prove that women can compete with men by seriously injuring a male service member in front of an audience. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Kate felt her pulse spike, but forced her voice to remain calm. Senator, I've spent 20 years proving myself through performance, not political statements. I had no interest in injuring Sergeant Courtland. I had every interest in surviving his attack. And yet here we are with a young man's career destroyed and you being hailed as some kind of feminist hero on social media. Quite convenient, wouldn't you say? I'd say it's a tragedy, Senator, for Sergeant Courtland, for his family, and frankly for military readiness. But the tragedy began when he threw a prohibited strike, not when I defended myself against it. Senator Rachel Martinez, one of the more progressive members of the committee, intervened. Lieutenant Commander Brennan, can you help us understand what was going through your mind in that moment when Sergeant Courtland attacked? Kate paused, reaching for honesty beneath the rehearsed answers. Senator, when someone throws a strike at your throat, you don't think. You don't have time to think. You run on training and instinct. My training said, redirect, control, neutralize. My instinct said, survive. That's what happened. And if you could go back knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently? It was the question Kate had been asking herself for 2 weeks, the one that haunted her dreams and stalked her waking hours. She looked at the senators, at the cameras, at the crowd holding its collective breath. If I could go back, I'd hope Sergeant Cortland would have exercised better judgment and not thrown that strike. But I can't control his choices, Senator. I can only control mine. And given the same situation, the same threat, the same split-second decision window, I'd make the same choice again. Because the alternative was letting someone kill me, and I'm not willing to do that to prove a point about gender equality. Senator Webb started to interrupt, but Senator Hawkins cut him off. We'll now hear from Sergeant Blake Cortland. Sergeant, please come forward. The room stirred as Blake was wheeled in his leg in a cast, his face pale and drawn. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Kate forced herself to watch as he was positioned at the witness table as he swore his oath as he prepared to tell whatever story Sullivan had coached him to tell. Senator Hawkins's voice was gentler now, addressing an injured service member. Sergeant Cortland, thank you for your willingness to testify despite your injuries. Please tell us what happened from your perspective. Blake cleared his throat, his eyes darting toward where Sullivan must have been sitting. Senator, I was participating in a routine training demonstration. I was matched against Lieutenant Commander Brennan and... He paused, swallowing hard. And things got out of control. Out of control? How? I was frustrated. She was faster than I expected, and I couldn't land any strikes. I got angry. His voice cracked. And I threw a strike that violated demonstration protocols. A strike aimed at her throat. The room went silent. That wasn't the testimony Sullivan had prepared. Kate could feel the shift in energy, the collective shock of Blake deviating from the script. Senator Webb leaned forward sharply. Sergeant Cortland, are you saying Lieutenant Commander Brennan's response was justified? Blake's hands were shaking on the armrests of his wheelchair. I'm saying I attacked her, Senator. Really attacked her, not demonstration sparring. And she defended herself. She didn't. His voice broke completely now. She didn't have to show restraint. She could have killed me. But she didn't. She just stopped me. Senator Hawkins' expression softened. Sergeant, this committee understands you've been under considerable pressure. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the circumstances surrounding this incident? Blake looked directly at Kate for the first time since entering the room. His eyes were red, hollowed out by pain, and something deeper recognition maybe, or regret. Captain Sullivan told me to lie, he said quietly. He told me to say Lieutenant Commander Brennan overreacted, that my strike wasn't serious, that she deliberately injured me. He promised to take care of my future if I did, but I can't. Tears were streaming down his face now. I can't do it. I screwed up. I let my ego and my anger control me, and I attacked someone who was just doing her job. She doesn't deserve to be punished for surviving my mistake. The room erupted. Senators demanded order. Media scrambled for their phones. Kate sat frozen watching Blake Cortland dismantle his own career prospects. To tell the truth, she hadn't been sure he still recognized. Senator Webb was shouting about order and procedure, but Senator Hawkins's gavel cut through the chaos. We will have order. Sergeant Cortland, are you stating under oath that Captain Wade Sullivan attempted to suborn perjury? Yes, ma'am. And are you willing to provide details of that conversation to this committee and to military investigators? Blake's voice was steady now, the kind of steady that came from finally stepping off the cliff and realizing the fall wasn't as terrible as living on the edge. Yes, ma'am, all of it. Senator Hawkins made a notation, her expression grim. Captain Wade Sullivan is hereby ordered to appear before this committee. We'll be taking a 30-minute recess while military police locate him. During the recess, Kate found herself in a small anteroom with Master Chief Morrison and the legal team. Nobody spoke at first, the shock of Blake's testimony still reverberating through their collective awareness. Finally, the female lawyer broke the silence. He just ended Sullivan's career, maybe his own too. No, Kate said quietly. He just started salvaging it. Maybe both of theirs. Michelle Cortland appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. I didn't think he'd do it. I thought he'd go through with Sullivan's plan, and I'd have to be the one to tell the truth. But he found his courage, Morrison said simply. Sometimes it just takes hitting bottom first. When the hearing reconvened, Captain Sullivan was escorted to the witness table by 2 military police officers, his expression carefully blank, but his eyes betraying fury. Senator Hawkins wasted no time. Captain Sullivan, you've been accused under oath of attempting to influence witness testimony through promises of future employment. How do you respond? Sullivan's voice was ice. Senator, I visited an injured member of my unit to offer support during a difficult time. If Sergeant Cortland interpreted concern for his future as quid pro quo for testimony, that's a misunderstanding. So you deny instructing him to testify falsely. I advised him to tell his truth, Senator. His truth or your truth, Captain? Sullivan's jaw clenched. I don't see a distinction. Senator Martinez entered the questioning. Captain Sullivan, records show you filed complaints against Lieutenant Commander Brennan within hours of the incident and encouraged multiple members of your unit to do the same using nearly identical language. That suggests coordination rather than organic concern. My unit had legitimate grievances. Your unit watched their teammate throw a prohibited strike and are now attempting to rewrite history. We've reviewed the security footage, Captain. Multiple angles, frame-by-frame analysis. All evidence supports Lieutenant Commander Brennan's account. So help me understand why you've invested so much energy in a false narrative. Sullivan's composure finally cracked. Because she made us all look like fools, Senator. She's a 55-year-old woman who should be retired, and she dismantled one of my best men in front of everyone who mattered. That's not about truth or justice. That's about the reputation of special warfare operations. So you admit your actions were motivated by embarrassment rather than genuine concern about excessive force. I admit nothing except that I'm tired of political correctness destroying military effectiveness. The outburst was damning unprofessional, career-ending. Senator Hawkins's expression went from stern to granite. Captain Sullivan, you are hereby relieved of your command pending a full investigation into allegations of witness tampering, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming. You're dismissed. As military police escorted Sullivan from the room, his eyes locked on Kate's with pure hatred. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away, refusing to show the fear that his expression was meant to invoke. The hearing continued for another hour with testimony from Master Chief Morrison, from Admiral Chen, from multiple witnesses who corroborated Kate's version of events. By the time Senator Hawkins gavelled the session closed, the conclusion was obvious to everyone in the room. This committee finds that Lieutenant Commander Kate Brennan acted in legitimate self-defense against a prohibited attack. Furthermore, we find that command failures and toxic leadership culture contributed to the incident's escalation. Our recommendation is that Lieutenant Commander Brennan be commended for her restraint and that comprehensive reviews of training protocols and command climate be instituted across Naval Special Warfare Command. This hearing is adjourned. Kate stood as the senators filed out her legs, unsteady, adrenaline finally crashing after hours of sustained alertness. Master Chief Morrison gripped her shoulder. His weathered face split in a rare, genuine smile. You did it, Kate. You survived them. We survived them, Kate corrected, looking at Michelle Cortland, who was being embraced by her mother. All of us. As Kate walked out of the hearing room into a hallway packed with cameras and reporters, someone pushed through the crowd. Blake Cortland, still in his wheelchair, his face exhausted but somehow lighter than it had been. Lieutenant Commander, he called out. Ma'am, Kate held up a hand, stopping him. Sergeant, whatever you're about to say, save it. Not for me, for yourself. Figure out who you want to be now that the person you were is gone. Then live into that. Blake nodded slowly, understanding somehow that this wasn't forgiveness but something more valuable, permission to start over, to rebuild, to become someone different than the man who'd thrown that strike. As Kate pushed through the crowd toward the exit, a reporter shouted above the noise, Lieutenant Commander, what's next for you? Kate paused at the door, looking back at the chaos she was leaving behind the cameras, the questions, the competing narratives that would spin this story into whatever shape fit people's preconceptions. Next, she said quietly, I go back to work. I train the next generation, and I try to make sure they don't have to learn the lessons we learned the hard way. Then she walked out into the DC afternoon, Master Chief Morrison at her side, leaving behind the political theater to return to the only thing that had ever really mattered: service. Part 5. The Legacy. The flight back to San Diego felt longer than the 5 hours it actually took. Kate stared out the window at clouds that looked like cotton, batting her mind, replaying Blake Cortland's testimony, the shock in Senator Webb's face the moment Sullivan's career had imploded in real time. Master Chief Morrison sat beside her, reading a thriller novel with the kind of focus that suggested he was deliberately not talking about what had just happened. Kate's phone buzzed constantly despite being in airplane mode, notifications queued up from the ground waiting to assault her the moment they landed. She didn't need to read them to know what they'd say. Half would praise her courage, half would condemn her existence. None of them would understand what it actually felt like to sit in that hearing room watching a broken man choose truth over convenience, knowing his honesty was costing him everything Sullivan had promised. "You thinking about Cortland?" Morrison asked without looking up from his book. "How'd you know?" "Because I am too. That kid surprised me today." Kate turned from the window. "You think he meant it, the testimony? Or was he just cutting his losses when he realized Michelle was going to expose Sullivan anyway?" Morrison finally closed his book, marking his place with a boarding pass. "Does it matter? He told the truth when lying would have been easier. That's growth, Kate. Whether it came from nobility or desperation, it still counts." "I want to believe that." "Then believe it. God knows you've spent enough time carrying guilt that isn't yours. Let this one go." The words should have brought relief, but Kate felt hollowed out, instead exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. She'd won the committee, had exonerated her. Sullivan was finished, her job was secure. But victory tasted like ash, because it required Blake Cortland to destroy himself on national television to achieve it. Landing brought the expected onslaught. Reporters camped at the airport cameras, tracking Kate's path to the parking garage. Security had to escort her and Morrison through the crowd, questions shouted from all sides about heroism and feminism and what this meant for the future of women in combat. Kate kept her head down, her expression neutral, offering the same no comment she'd given the reporters outside the hearing room. Admiral Chen called before Kate even reached her car. "I watched the whole thing. You handled yourself beautifully up there." "Thank you, ma'am." "We need to talk about next steps. The Pentagon program I mentioned, the senior instructor position. It's yours if you want it. Full reinstatement to active duty promotion to full commander oversight of defensive tactics training across all special warfare units." Kate leaned against her car, the metal warm from the California sun. "That's a hell of an offer, Admiral." "You've earned it. Everything that happened, the incident, the hearing, all of it proved you're exactly what we need. Someone who can fight when necessary, but chooses not to when possible. Someone who understands that strength isn't about domination." "Can I think about it?" There was a pause on the other end, longer than Kate expected. "Kate, I'm not going to pressure you, but I need you to understand something. What you did up there today, that mattered. Not just for your career, but for every woman trying to prove she belongs in uniform. You showed them it's possible to stand up to institutional pressure and win. Don't underestimate the value of that." After the call ended, Kate sat in her car in the parking garage, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back seemed older than the one who'd stood in that training ring 2 weeks ago. Older and somehow more fragile, like the armor she'd worn for 20 years, had finally developed cracks she couldn't ignore anymore. Morrison tapped on the window. "You coming, or are you planning to live in this parking garage?" "Considering it. Seems quieter than what's waiting out there." "True, but you've never been one for quiet." They drove back to base in Morrison's truck, taking side streets to avoid the media camped at the main gate. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Kate of deployments in the Middle East, watching sunsets from forward operating bases while wondering if she'd see another one. "You gonna take the promotion?" Morrison asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to. The chance to actually change things from the inside, to rebuild training culture, to make it better for the women coming up behind me, that's everything I've wanted. But I'm tired, Doc. Bone deep exhausted. Not just from the hearing, from all of it. 20 years of proving myself, of fighting for basic respect, of being the example and the symbol and the trailblazer. Maybe I've earned the right to just be a person for a while." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, navigating traffic with the easy competence of someone who'd driven in far more dangerous conditions. You remember Somalia, that op in Mogadishu where you saved the team, every day. After we got back, you told me something. You said that carrying the weight of leadership was the price you paid for having the skills to lead, that walking away when people needed you wasn't an option you could live with. He glanced at her. Has that changed? Kate's throat tightened. Maybe. I don't know. Ask me after I've slept for a week. Base housing was mercifully quiet when they arrived, most personnel either at evening chow or in their quarters. Kate's unit was dark exactly as she'd left it, with a stack of mail that had accumulated during her absence. She sorted through it mechanically, Bill's official notices, a handwritten letter with no return address. She opened the letter, carefully unfolding notebook paper covered in cramped handwriting. Lieutenant Commander Brennan, you don't know me. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a 19-year-old sailor at boot camp in Great Lakes. I've wanted to be a SEAL since I was 12, but everyone told me it was impossible. My father told me. My recruiters told me. Even my female friends told me I was chasing a fantasy. Then I saw the video of you and Sergeant Cortland. I watched you take down a man twice your size who was trying to hurt you, and I realized something. It's not impossible. It's just hard, and I'm okay with hard. Thank you for showing me it's possible. I shipped to Bud's prep in 3 months. I'm going to make it because you showed me the way. Kate read the letter 3 times, each pass hitting harder than the last. This was what Admiral Chen meant. This was the weight and the privilege of becoming a symbol, the responsibility that came with being visible. Somewhere in Illinois, a 19-year-old girl was training harder because Kate had defended herself on a training ground in San Diego. She thought about quitting, about walking away, about taking off the uniform, and finally resting. But Sarah Chen's letter made that choice feel less like self-care and more like abandonment. Kate didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her small desk and wrote a response to Sarah Chen, and then another letter to Admiral Chen accepting the promotion and the position. By dawn, she'd written 7 letters to young women who'd reached out through official channels, each one asking some variation of the same question. How do you keep going when everything tells you to stop? Kate's answer was the same in every letter. You keep going because someone behind you is watching, learning from your example, drawing courage from your refusal to quit. You keep going because stopping means they stop too, and they deserve better than that. Master Chief Morrison found her at 0600 still at her desk, surrounded by handwritten letters and an empty coffee pot. You look terrible, he said with characteristic bluntness. I feel worse, but I made a decision. The promotion? The promotion, the program, all of it. Kate stood her back, protesting from hours in the chair. I'm staying Doc. I'm building something that outlasts me. Something that makes sure the next generation doesn't have to fight all the battles I fought. Morrison's weathered face creased into something that might have been pride. Your father would be proud. The words hit Kate like a physical blow. She rarely let herself think about her father, the decorated captain who died in Afghanistan when she was 16. He'd been the reason she enlisted, the reason she pushed through SEAL training when every instructor told her she'd fail, the reason she kept going when quitting would have been easier. I hope so, she said quietly. I really hope so. The next morning, Kate reported to Admiral Chen's office at 0800 sharp, wearing her service uniform and carrying a folder with her initial proposals for the training reform program. Admiral Chen looked up from her desk, a smile breaking through her usual stern expression. Commander Brennan, I like the sound of that. I haven't been promoted yet, ma'am. Formality. The paperwork's already processed. You pin on next week. Admiral Chen gestured to a chair. I assume you have thoughts about how to structure this program. Kate opened her folder, revealing months of accumulated notes and observations from her time as a civilian instructor. I do, ma'am. But before we discuss structure, I need to address something. Blake Cortland. Admiral Chen's expression shifted to neutral. What about him? He's being medically retired, which means he's losing his career, his identity, and probably his sense of purpose. I want to bring him into the program. The silence that followed was so complete, Kate could hear the air conditioning cycling on. You want to hire the man who tried to seriously injure you. Admiral Chen's tone was carefully controlled. The man who initially planned to perjure himself to end your career. I want to hire the man who chose truth over convenience when it mattered most. The man who faced a room full of senators and destroyed his own future to tell the truth. Kate leaned forward. Ma'am, Blake Cortland's biggest problem isn't that he's malicious. It's that he's a product of a toxic system that taught him the wrong lessons. He can't be an operator anymore. But he could be a teacher. Someone who stands in front of classes and says, I learned this the hard way so you don't have to. That's remarkably forgiving of you. It's not forgiveness, ma'am. It's strategy. We can punish Blake and satisfy the people who want revenge, or we can rehabilitate him and turn him into an asset. Which approach actually changes culture? Admiral Chen studied Kate for a long moment, then pulled out a notepad and started writing. You're absolutely right, which is annoying because now I have to do more paperwork. I'll approve Cortland as an assistant instructor on a probationary basis. But Kate, if this blows up in our faces, it's your responsibility. Understood, ma'am. 2 weeks later, Kate stood at the entrance to the Brennan Cortland Training Reform Center, watching workers install the sign above the door. The name had been Admiral Chen's idea, a deliberate statement that transformation was possible, that former enemies could become partners in building something better. Blake Cortland arrived in a wheelchair, his mother pushing him despite his protests that he could manage the manual chair himself. His leg was still in a cast, but physical therapy was progressing better than doctors had initially predicted. He'd walk again. He'd even run eventually, though, not at the level required for special operations. Commander Brennan, he said formally, Margaret Cortland stepping back to give them space. Thank you for this opportunity. I know I don't deserve it. You're right. You don't deserve it based on what you did. You've earned it based on what you chose to become. Kate gestured to the building behind her. This program is about teaching a different kind of strength. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that uplifts. Not the kind that proves superiority, but the kind that creates capability in others. You think you can teach that? Blake looked at the building at the sign bearing both their names at his mother, watching with tears in her eyes. I can try. And if I fail, I'll try again until I get it right. Good. Because we've got 40 recruits arriving next week and half of them are women. They're going to be watching everything we do, learning from our example. We screw this up and we set the program back years. No pressure then. Kate allowed herself a small smile. None at all. Michelle Cortland appeared from the parking lot carrying boxes of training materials. She'd been accepted into the SEAL pipeline and was currently in prep training, but she'd taken leave to help set up the center. When she saw Blake and Kate standing together, her face broke into a genuine smile. Look at you two, not trying to kill each other. That's progress. Don't jinx it, Blake said, but there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. I'm still getting used to the idea that the woman who broke my leg is now my boss. The woman who saved your life is now your boss, Margaret Cortland corrected gently. Don't forget that part. Blake's expression sobered. I haven't, Mom. I won't. The first training cohort arrived on a Monday morning that felt more like the start of something historic than a routine class. 40 sailors, ages 19 to 35, representing every demographic the Navy encompassed. Kate stood at the front of the classroom, Blake seated beside her in his wheelchair, Master Chief Morrison leaning against the back wall like a guardian angel. Welcome to the Training Reform Program, Kate began. You're here because someone looked at your service records and saw potential. Potential to be better fighters, better leaders, better service members. My name is Commander Kate Brennan, and this is Assistant Instructor Blake Cortland. Some of you have probably seen the video of us on that training ground. You know how that encounter ended. The room was silent, 40 pairs of eyes fixed on her. What you don't know is what happened after. The investigations, the hearings, the political circus. You don't know about the choices we both made. The mistakes we learned from the hard conversations about what strength really means and who gets to define it. Kate paused. This program exists because one moment of violence forced an entire institution to ask questions it had been avoiding for decades. Questions about gender, about aggression, about the difference between being strong and being dangerous. Blake cleared his throat, his voice rough but steady. I was dangerous. Not strong dangerous. I confused intimidation with competence, aggression with skill. And it took having my leg broken on national television to understand the difference. He looked at Kate. Commander Brennan could have killed me that day. The strike she used to take me down, in a real combat situation, she could have adjusted the angle 6 inches and snapped my neck instead of my leg. She chose restraint. She chose to neutralize the threat without eliminating the person. That's real strength. A hand went up in the audience. Female sailor, early 20s, with the kind of determination Kate recognized from her younger self. Sir, ma'am? What if we're not strong enough to show that kind of restraint? What if we freeze or overreact? Then you learn, Kate said simply. That's what training is for. We're going to put you in situations that challenge your judgment, your technique, your ability to assess threats and respond appropriately. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to freeze. You're going to overreact. And we're going to help you understand why and how to do better next time. The training was brutal by design, not physically brutal like traditional SEAL prep, but psychologically challenging in ways that exposed assumptions and biases the sailors didn't know they carried. Kate and Blake worked in tandem, demonstrating techniques while deconstructing the toxic patterns that had governed military combat training for generations. 3 weeks into the program, Kate received a call from Senator Patricia Hawkins. Commander Brennan, I wanted to update you on the committee's follow-up investigation. Captain Sullivan has been court-martialed and discharged. Several other officers in his chain of command are facing disciplinary action for fostering toxic leadership culture. That's good to hear, Senator. There's more. The committee is recommending your training program be expanded fleet-wide. Every special warfare unit, every combat training facility. We want what you're building in San Diego replicated across the entire military. Kate felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a familiar burden. Senator, with respect, we're 3 weeks into our first cohort. We haven't proven this works yet. You proved it works the moment Sergeant Cortland chose truth over self-preservation. You proved it works every time one of your trainees realizes that strength comes from discipline, not aggression. Don't underestimate what you've accomplished. After the call, Kate walked out to the training yard where Blake was running a session on conflict de-escalation. His wheelchair was parked to the side now he'd graduated to crutches 2 days earlier, his mobility slowly returning. He was demonstrating how to read body language, how to identify genuine threats versus performative aggression, using his own experience as the cautionary tale. I thought I was threatening when I faced Commander Brennan, Blake told the class. I thought my size and my anger and my aggressive posturing made me dangerous. What I didn't understand was that real threats don't announce themselves. They don't peacock. They assess, they wait, they strike with precision when the opportunity presents itself. He gestured to Kate. Commander Brennan never threatened me verbally, never tried to intimidate me. She just systematically dismantled my technique until I had nothing left except rage. And rage makes you stupid. One of the male sailors raised his hand. Sir, how do you live with it, knowing you lost too? He caught himself recalibrating his language. Knowing you were bested so decisively. Blake's answer was quiet but firm. I live with it by understanding that losing that fight was the best thing that ever happened to me. It destroyed the person I was so I could become someone better, someone who measures strength by what he builds instead of what he destroys. Kate watched her former opponent teach the next generation, watching him transform pain into wisdom, humiliation into humility. This was the real victory, she thought, not the hearing or the exoneration or the promotion, but this moment where a broken man chose reconstruction over bitterness. 6 months into the program, Kate received a letter from Sarah Chen, the boot camp sailor, who'd written after the incident. Sarah had made it through Bud's prep and was about to start Hell Week, the notorious phase of SEAL training that broke most candidates. Her letter was short, written in haste between training evolutions. Commander Brennan, I'm scared. I'm exhausted. I'm surrounded by men who don't think I belong here. But every time I want to quit, I think about you standing in that training ring, refusing to back down, refusing to let someone else's violence define your limits. If you could survive what you survived, I can survive this. See you on the other side." Kate pinned the letter to her office wall, adding it to the growing collection of correspondence from female service members who'd found courage in her example. Each letter was a reminder of why she'd stayed, why she'd accepted the promotion, why she endured the scrutiny and the pressure and the endless responsibility of being a symbol. Master Chief Morrison found her staring at the wall of letters, his expression knowing. Heavy, isn't it, carrying all those hopes? Sometimes. But it's a privilege, too. These women, they're not asking me to fight their battles. They're just asking me to show them it's possible, that they can be strong without apologizing for it, capable without seeking permission for it. "Your dad would be proud," Morrison said again. And this time, Kate let herself believe it. The first cohort graduated on a bright Saturday morning with Admiral Chen presiding over the ceremony. 40 sailors who'd arrived uncertain and divided now stood unified, representing something larger than themselves. Proof that culture could change, that toxic patterns could be broken, that former enemies could become allies in building something better. Kate stood at the podium looking out at faces that had transformed over 6 months of intense training. You came here as individuals carrying the assumptions and biases of an imperfect system. You're leaving as a unit that understands strength is collective, not individual. That the best warriors are the ones who prevent fights, not the ones who win them. Blake added his own closing remarks, his voice steady, despite the emotion underneath. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine standing here next to Commander Brennan as anything other than her opponent. I couldn't imagine a world where admitting weakness made you stronger, where seeking help was courageous instead of shameful. You've all witnessed my transformation from someone who measured worth by dominance to someone who understands that true leadership is about service. Thank you for letting me learn alongside you. After the ceremony, Margaret Cortland approached Kate with tears streaming down her face. Thank you for giving my son a second chance, for seeing past his mistakes to the person he could become. He did the hard part, Kate replied. I just gave him a place to do it. Still, you didn't have to. After everything he did, you would have been justified in letting his career end. Instead, you rebuilt him. Margaret gripped Kate's hands. That's the kind of strength I spent 20 years in the Army trying to teach people. The kind that heals instead of harms. That evening, Kate and Blake sat on the steps outside the training center watching the sunset over San Diego Bay. Blake's leg was mostly healed now, though he still walked with a slight limp that he'd probably carry forever. Physical therapy had been brutal, but he'd approached it with the same determination he'd once brought to proving his dominance, except now that determination was focused on reconstruction instead of destruction. I've been thinking about something, Blake said, his voice quiet. About that day on the training ground. What if you hadn't been as skilled as you are? What if you'd been a less experienced instructor who froze or panicked? Then you probably would have seriously injured me, realized what you'd done, and spent the rest of your life carrying that guilt. Kate's tone was matter-of-fact. You'd be in prison not helping train the next generation. That's what keeps me up at night sometimes. Not my leg or my ruined career. The knowledge that I came within seconds of being a completely different person, someone who'd killed a woman because his ego couldn't handle being beaten. But you're not that person. You made different choices when they mattered most. Blake was quiet for a long moment, watching seagulls wheel against the darkening sky. Do you ever wonder what your dad would think about all of this? Kate felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that never fully healed when she thought about her father. Every day. He died believing in a military that valued honor and integrity above all else. I'd like to think what we're building here would make him proud, that we're creating the institution he thought he was serving. For what it's worth, I think he'd be incredibly proud, of you specifically, of how you turned the worst day of my life into something that matters. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, two former enemies who'd become partners in transformation watching the first stars appear in the California sky. Somewhere in the building behind them, the next cohort's files waited 40 more sailors ready to learn that strength came in forms they'd never imagined. Kate's phone buzzed with a text from Michelle Cortland. I passed Hell Week, made it through. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Kate showed the message to Blake, who smiled through tears he didn't bother hiding. She did it. My cousin actually did it. She did it because she believed it was possible. Because she saw someone else do the impossible and decided she could too. Kate stood stretching muscles that ached from a day of ceremonies and speeches. That's the legacy we're building, Blake. Not the viral video or the Senate hearing or even this program. The real legacy is every person who looks at what happened and decides they can be braver, stronger, better than they thought possible. Blake struggled to his feet, his leg protesting but holding. Then we better make sure we're worthy of that legacy. 2 years after the incident, Kate stood in the Pentagon briefing room presenting the training reform program's results to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The statistics were compelling: injury rates down 34%, disciplinary incidents down 42%, retention of female service members up 57%. But the numbers didn't capture what really mattered. What mattered was the 800 instructors now trained in the program's methodology, carrying its principles to bases around the world. What mattered was the cultural shift happening in real time as a generation of service members learned to value discipline over dominance, precision over aggression, character over credentials. What mattered was Blake Cortland, now walking without a limp after 2 years of relentless physical therapy, running his own satellite training facility, and teaching classes on recovering from catastrophic failures. He'd become one of the program's most effective instructors, precisely because he'd been its most spectacular failure first. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a 4-star general with 40 years of service, listened to Kate's presentation with the kind of focused attention that suggested he understood the implications. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Commander Brennan, what you're describing isn't just training reform. It's cultural revolution. You're asking us to fundamentally rethink how we develop warriors, how we measure strength, how we define leadership." With respect, sir, I'm not asking. The data shows this works. The question is whether institutional inertia matters more than institutional improvement. The general's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but acknowledgement of the challenge. "You don't pull punches, do you?" "I learned from experience that pulling punches just prolongs the fight, sir." The Joint Chiefs approved the program for full military-wide implementation, with Kate promoted to captain and given oversight of combat training across all service branches. It was more responsibility than she'd ever wanted, more visibility than she'd ever sought, but it was also the culmination of everything she'd fought for across 22 years in uniform. That night, Kate called Master Chief Morrison, who'd retired 6 months earlier to finally spend time with grandchildren he barely knew. "Doc, they approved it. The whole thing. Full implementation." "I knew they would. You gave them data they couldn't argue with and results they couldn't ignore." Morrison's voice was warm with pride. "So what happens now? Now I figure out how to scale a program we built for 40 people to train 40,000. No pressure. You'll manage. You always do." There was a pause. "Kate, I want you to know something. In 40 years of service, I watched a lot of people try to change the military from the inside. Most of them failed because they forgot that institutions are made of people, and people resist change unless you give them a reason to embrace it. You gave them that reason. You showed them that the alternative to transformation was stagnation, and stagnation meant irrelevance. I had help, Doc. I had you and Admiral Chen and even Blake Cortland in his own complicated way. True, but you were the catalyst. Don't diminish that." 3 years after the incident, Kate received an invitation to speak at the Naval Academy graduation ceremony. She stood at the podium looking out at 1,000 midshipmen about to become ensigns, their faces full of hope and determination and the kind of naive certainty that only came before reality tested your assumptions. "The moment that defined my career lasted less than 10 seconds, Kate began. In those 10 seconds, I made choices that altered the trajectory of my life, ended. Someone else's career sparked Senate hearings and eventually led to the training reforms you'll all experience as young officers. But here's what I want you to understand. Those 10 seconds mattered because of the 20 years that came before them. Every training evolution, every deployment, every moment I chose discipline over anger, precision over aggression, survival over ego, all of it prepared me for that split second when everything was on the line. She paused, making eye contact with individuals throughout the audience. You're about to enter a military that's changing. The toxic patterns that governed previous generations are being dismantled. The assumptions about gender and strength and leadership are being challenged. You'll be the generation that either completes that transformation or allows it to stall. Which one you choose will define not just your careers, but the future of the institution you're sworn to serve. After the ceremony, a young female midshipman approached Kate with a question. Ma'am, how do you deal with being a symbol? With knowing that everything you do is watched and judged and used as evidence for or against women in combat? Kate recognized herself in the young woman's question, the same anxiety she'd carried for decades. You deal with it by remembering that being a symbol is secondary to being a good officer. Do your job with excellence, treat people with respect, make decisions based on principle rather than politics. The symbolism takes care of itself. But what if I mess up? What if I fail and prove all the skeptics right? Then you'll fail exactly like men have been failing for centuries, with the only difference being that they never had to carry the weight of representing their entire gender. Your failure would be yours alone, nobody else's, just like your success will be yours to own. Kate softened her tone. Besides, failure isn't the disaster you think it is. Some of my best teaching came from my worst mistakes. Some of my strongest relationships came from spectacular failures that forced me to rebuild. Don't fear failure. Fear mediocrity. Fear playing it safe when boldness is required. The young woman straightened, something shifting in her expression. Thank you, ma'am. That helps. 4 years after the incident, Kate received a package with no return address. Inside was a framed photograph of the moment Blake Cortland's leg had broken, captured by one of the many cameras recording the demonstration. But someone had edited the image, adding text along the bottom, "The moment everything changed." A note accompanied the photo, written in Blake's distinctive handwriting, "Commander Brennan. I've been in therapy for 3 years, working through everything that happened and everything I became afterward. My therapist asked me to identify the single moment that defined my life. This was it. Not because it destroyed my career, but because it destroyed my delusions. You gave me a gift that day, even though neither of us knew it. You showed me who I really was, underneath all the bravado and toxic masculinity. And then you gave me the chance to become someone better. This photo hangs in my office as a reminder that rock bottom isn't the end of your story, it's just the foundation you build on. Thank you for being willing to break me so I could rebuild myself correctly. With respect and gratitude, Blake." Kate hung the photo in her own office beside the wall of letters from female service members and above her father's silver star, which she'd inherited after his death. The photo became a teaching tool, something she pointed to when students asked about the cost of necessary violence, the complexity of forgiveness, the reality that sometimes destroying something was the only way to rebuild it better. 5 years after the incident, Admiral Chen retired and Kate was promoted to Rear Admiral, the youngest female admiral in naval special warfare history. Her promotion ceremony was attended by 800 personnel, including Blake Cortland and Michelle Cortland, now a newly minted SEAL who'd graduated at the top of her Buds class. Michelle approached Kate after the ceremony, her trident gleaming on her uniform. "Admiral Brennan, I wanted to thank you properly. For everything. For showing me it was possible. For saving my cousin. For building something that made room for people like me. You earned your trident, Cortland. I just showed you the door. You walked through it yourself. Still, without that day on the training ground, without seeing what you did, I would have believed Blake when he told me women couldn't hack it in special operations. You proved him wrong. And then you gave him the chance to admit he was wrong and become part of the solution. That's leadership I want to model my career on." Blake stood nearby, his dress uniform perfectly pressed, his bearings straight despite the slight limp that would always mark him. "She's right, Admiral. Everything good in my life now exists because you refused to let me stay broken. You could have ended my story that day on the training ground. Instead, you gave me a new chapter." Kate looked at them both, the cousin who'd told Michelle she couldn't succeed, and the woman who'd proved him wrong by succeeding spectacularly. She thought about the journey that had brought them all here, the violence and the healing, the failures and the redemptions, the moments of darkness that had somehow led to light. "We're not finished," Kate said simply. "The work continues. The culture shifts slowly. Every generation has to fight to preserve the ground the previous generation won. You're both part of that fight now. Don't let anyone tell you it's over." 10 years after the incident, Kate stood in the same training facility where Blake Cortland had attacked her watching a new demonstration. The facility had been renamed the Brennan Center for Combat Excellence, and it now trained 3,000 personnel annually in defensive tactics, threat assessment, and leadership under pressure. The demonstration was flawless, controlled aggression, meeting disciplined defense, with both participants showing the kind of mutual respect that had been absent from Kate's original match with Blake. When it concluded, the instructor, a former student of Kate's who'd risen to command the facility, approached for feedback. "Admiral, your assessment. Perfect execution. Both fighters showed technical proficiency, emotional control, and respect for their opponent. That's exactly what combat training should look like." "We learned from the best, ma'am." Kate walked the grounds of the facility, past training rooms and offices and walls covered with photographs documenting 10 years of transformation. One photo showed her and Blake teaching their first class. Another showed Michelle Cortland receiving her trident. A third showed the Senate hearing captured at the moment Blake had chosen truth over convenience. Master Chief Morrison appeared beside her, his hair now completely white, but his bearing still military straight, despite retirement. "Quite a legacy you've built here, Kate." "We built it together, all of us. Every person who chose growth over comfort, truth over convenience, transformation over stagnation." "True, but you were the catalyst. That still matters." Kate stopped in front of the photograph from the original incident, the moment frozen in time when Blake's leg had broken and everything had changed. She'd looked at this image thousands of times over the past decade, searching for the moment when it could have gone differently, when she could have made a choice that didn't result in serious injury. She'd never found it. The attack had been real, the threat genuine, the response necessary. What came after the healing, the redemption, the transformation that was the choice, not in the moment of violence, but in every moment afterward, when they'd all decided whether to let that violence define them or refine them. "Do you ever regret it?" Morrison asked quietly. "Staying, taking the promotion, carrying the weight of being a symbol." Kate considered the question with the kind of honesty that only came from a decade of reflection. "Some days, yes. The scrutiny never stops. The pressure never eases. Every decision gets analyzed. Every mistake magnified, every success attributed to factors beyond my control. It's exhausting carrying the hopes of every woman in uniform who's wondering if she's good enough. But then I get a letter from someone like Sarah Chen, who's now a SEAL instructor herself, training the next generation. Or I watch Michelle Cortland lead a team with confidence that would have been impossible without someone proving it was possible first. Or I see Blake Cortland teaching young men that strength isn't about domination, and I realize that staying was the right choice. Hard, but right." That evening, Kate received a call from Blake. "Admiral, I wanted you to know something. I'm getting married." "Blake, that's wonderful. Congratulations." "To a female Marine. A combat veteran who reminds me a lot of you, actually. Strong discipline takes no crap from anyone." His voice was warm with happiness. "We met at one of the training sessions I was running. She challenged every assumption I didn't even know I still had, in a good way." "Sounds like you found your match." "I did. And Admiral, I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to attend the wedding. I know it's a lot to ask given our history, but you're part of my story. The most important part, really. It wouldn't feel right celebrating this new chapter without acknowledging that you made it possible." Kate felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd carried for a decade finally releasing. "I'd be honored, Blake." The wedding was small, intimate, held at a chapel overlooking San Diego Bay. Kate sat in the third row watching Blake Cortland marry his Marine, watching him promise to honor and respect and partner with a woman who could probably kick his ass if necessary. The ceremony was beautiful, but what struck Kate most was Blake's vows. 10 years ago, I was broken, he said, his voice steady, despite tears streaming down his face. Physically, emotionally, spiritually broken. And I blamed everyone except myself. But in that brokenness, I found people who refused to let me stay broken, who showed me that transformation was possible, that I could be better than my worst moment. Sarah, you're marrying a man who knows what it's like to hit bottom and climb back up. A man who understands that strength comes from vulnerability, that leadership comes from service, that love comes from respect. I promise to honor you, to partner with you, to see you as my equal in everything that matters. Because I learned from the best. His eyes found Kate in the crowd. That real strength comes from building others up, not tearing them down. After the ceremony, Blake introduced Kate to his new wife, who gripped Kate's hand with the kind of firm handshake that spoke of confidence and capability. Admiral Brennan Blakes told me everything. About the incident, the hearing, the training program. I want you to know that the man I married exists because you refused to give up on him. Thank you for that. He did the hard work himself. I just gave him the space to do it. Still, not many people would have shown that kind of grace. The military needs more leaders like you. 15 years after the incident, Kate retired from active duty at the rank of Vice Admiral, the highest-ranking female officer in naval special warfare history. Her retirement ceremony was attended by thousands with speeches from Blake Courtland, Michelle Courtland, Admiral Chen, and a dozen other officers whose careers had been shaped by the training reforms she'd implemented. But the speech that mattered most came from Sarah Chen, the boot camp sailor who'd written Kate 15 years earlier. Sarah was now a commander herself, running her own training facility, continuing the work Kate had started. Vice Admiral Brennan showed me that being strong didn't mean being invulnerable. Sarah said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. It meant being capable, prepared, and willing to make hard choices when necessary. She showed me that defending yourself wasn't violence, it was survival. And she showed me that the real measure of a warrior wasn't how many fights you won, but how many people you lifted up along the way. I'm standing here today because 15 years ago, a woman I'd never met refused to be anything less than excellent, even when doing so nearly cost her everything. Admiral Brennan, on behalf of every female service member whose path you cleared, every male service member whose assumptions you challenged, and every person in uniform who benefited from the cultural transformation you sparked, thank you. Kate stood to acknowledge the ovation, looking out at an audience that represented everything she'd fought for. Male and female officers standing side by side, united not by gender, but by shared commitment to excellence. Young sailors whose training included the principles she'd spent 15 years refining. Instructors who taught the methodology she'd developed through trial, error, and painful experience. And there, in the front row, sat Blake Courtland with his wife and their 2 children, a son and a daughter, who'd grow up in a military their father had helped transform. Blake caught Kate's eye and nodded once, a gesture that contained 15 years of gratitude, respect, and mutual understanding. That evening, Kate sat alone in her quarters, packing the last of her belongings. Her walls were covered with photographs and letters and commendations, each one telling part of a story that had started with violence and ended with transformation. She took down her father's silver star, the one constant through decades of change, and held it carefully. "I did it, Dad," she whispered to the empty room. "I built something that matters, something that outlasts me, something you would have been proud of." Her phone buzzed with a text from Master Chief Morrison. "Proud of you, Kate. Your father would be too. Now go be a person instead of a symbol for a while. You've earned it." Kate smiled, set down the silver star, and walked out of her quarters for the last time. Tomorrow, she'd be a civilian. Tomorrow, the weight of institutional responsibility would belong to someone else. Tomorrow, she could finally rest. But tonight, she was still Vice Admiral Kate Brennan, the woman who'd defended herself on a training ground 15 years ago and accidentally sparked a revolution. The woman who'd turned personal trauma into institutional transformation. The woman who'd proven that sometimes the most important battles were won not with aggression, but with discipline, precision, and the courage to stand firm when everything told you to back down. She'd broken Blake Courtland's leg in less than 10 seconds. But she'd spent 15 years proving that breaking wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new one written by people brave enough to rebuild better than before. And as Kate walked across the base one final time, she understood that her real legacy wasn't the training reforms or the policy changes or even the thousands of people she'd influenced. Her real legacy was the simple truth she'd embodied through 2 decades of service strength. Wasn't about domination or violence or proving superiority. Strength was about surviving when survival seemed impossible, about rebuilding when destruction seemed permanent, about transforming pain into purpose and failure into wisdom. Blake Cortland had attacked her with intent to harm. She'd defended herself with intent to survive. And together, through choices neither of them could have predicted, they'd built something that made the military stronger, safer, and more capable of living up to its highest ideals. That was a legacy worth breaking for.